who's one of the best warriors in the land, second only to the great Achilles. He's an Ethiopian king and really the most prevalent African figure in all of Greek mythos. It's said that he was killed by the only man who was a better warrior than him, Achilles, who might have also been immortal. Maybe it was like South Park rules. It takes an immortal to kill an immortal. Number 9, Merlin. We all know Merlin. He's one of the most famous characters from English myth. Being the guy who helped King Arthur, it must be easy to become king when you have a wizard in your back pocket. But what if he isn't myth? What if the character is real and is still walking around to this day? There's evidence of characters like Merlin or Merlin himself popping up again and again through English history. Some people believe that he's still alive and still protecting the royal family. Maybe if he's still alive, he should retire from protecting some of the richest people in the world and help out the rest of us. Why not cast a spell that gives me a good night's sleep for once? Number 8, Hercules. One of the buffest dudes in history. If you don't know the story of Hercules, he was basically a demigod and he wanted to be a god. And the gods told him, if you want to be a god, you gotta show everyone how much of a stud you are. And he did. He killed a lion with his bare hands, then he killed a multi-headed fire-breathing hydra, and he went to the underworld and captured the gatekeeper of the underworld. This dude's a legend, and his core strength must have been insane. Now the story goes that he was never given his wish and granted godhood, but many people believe that the myth is wrong and this is just the story that was passed around. That the true story is that he was gifted his rightful god power and immortality. As long as he never told a soul, he would keep his godhood. I mean, you wouldn't want him to tell anyone because then there would be a bunch of people trying to kill stuff trying to become gods. Number 7, Sir Galahad. One of the most famous knights of the Round Table, the original boys club. I bet they all met in a treehouse. You had to climb a rope ladder to get into it. You could only get in if you knew the secret password and there was a sign on the door that said no girls allowed. I might be mixing up King Arthur's knights with the Little Rascals. Anyways, Sir Galahad was the illegitimate son of Sir Lancelot and Elaine of Corbetic, and it said he is one of the people who has found the Holy Grail. Drinking from said grail is supposed to grant the person immortality. Now just like Merlin, Galahad is supposed to be one thing of legend, but some people believe that the knights did exist and are still in charge of secret underground cults to this day. If this is real, I would want footage of someone putting Galahad in one of Elon Musk's rockets and his face as he gets shot into space. Nothing like a 1,000-year-old man seeing what space looks like. Number 6, Conan O'Brien. Let's take a hard left turn out of myth and turn it to something that might be one of the strangest on the list. Late night TV show host Conan O'Brien. Why, you may ask? Well, it's because of this picture. This is a comparison picture between Conan and a Civil War soldier. They're eerily close to each other. Maybe Conan is closer to Wolverine than the hilarious ginger comic we have all come to know and love. What if all his jokes are just a way he can cover up his PTSD from fighting in centuries of wars? I mean, good for him. To go from war vet to American celebrity, that's a big jump that almost no one could do. Maybe back on the battlefield, no one thought he was funny, so he became immortal out of sheer willpower, just so he could stay alive long enough to find his audience. Number 5, James Bedford. If you're going to die, but you have faith that in the future they'll be able to bring you back to life, then why not throw your body into a giant freezer? James Bedford was the first person ever to be cryogenically frozen. He was an American psychology professor at the University of California and wanted his body to be preserved for later days, just in case they ever figured out a way to bring frozen people back from the dead so they could walk around again. If this was ever to happen, he would be first in line. He passed away in 1967, and right after he was pronounced legally dead, they threw him in a big chest freezer and set it to Ice Age. I'm sure it was more scientific than that, but you get the idea. Now, we haven't come across the technology to resurrect this guy, but if we do, he's gonna get the Captain America treatment and be very close to being immortal. Number 4, Hugh Glass. Have you ever seen The Revenant? The movie where Leonardo DiCaprio has the worst weekend ever? Well, in that movie, he plays frontiersman Hugh Glass. Now, Hugh Glass was mauled by a bear and left for dead and had to trek for miles and miles with broken bones and brutal wounds and survived. How did he do this? Well, the history books said he did this with grit, determination, and pure survivalist instincts. But the deep dark corners of the internet have other opinions. Some people are pushing the idea that he's an immortal or has some sort of Deadpool healing factor. This would allow him to survive such a brutal attack and make it back to full health. And if this is true, he might still be alive to this day, keeping his healing ability secret from the public. Number 3, Jack Lucas. One of the biggest bad all time. This guy literally might be unkillable. I don't want to trash talk him because I'm pretty sure he would find me and come beat the hell out of me. Jack Lucas fought in World War II, and while serving, he jumped on 2 Japanese grenades and survived both explosions. And not like barely even survived, he kept serving in the army. Maybe back then, Japanese craftsmanship wasn't what it is now. After this, he became a paratrooper, and on one of his jumps, his chute didn't deploy. Now you think plummeting to the earth would surely just kill you. Not Jack Lucas. His buddies found him alive and well. This dude is probably like a werewolf or a robot or like a robot werewolf. Number 2, Roy Benavides. We're gonna stay on this trend of people who could beat up anyone's dad with Roy Benavides.
They made fun of his name so bad he had to be like that.
He stepped
you know, that was a time where it was like, yo, if people made fun of you, you just had to be tough. With a name like Benavides.
Not only am I gonna walk again, I'm gonna go back and fight in war again.
Just say it again.
And he did. He
fought
in the Vietnam War. During one battle, he was leading a small troop and they were under attack by over 1,000 Vietnamese soldiers. By the time the fighting was done, he had been wounded by either gunfire, knives, or shrapnel 37 times. 37! He was pronounced dead and put in a body bag. Then, he came back to life and unzipped the body bag he was inside. Death probably looked at this guy and was like, nah, you're too much for me. We're trying to build a nice neighborhood over here. You stay alive. Number 1, Tsutomu Yamaguchi. What's the worst week you've ever had? Whatever it is, I bet it's not as bad as this guy. Tsutomu Yamaguchi was in Hiroshima in 1945 when the first atomic bomb dropped. He obviously survived. I mean, he's on our list of immortals. He did sustain some injuries. His skin was burned and one of his eardrums was ruptured. But for an atomic bomb dropping, that's like leaving relatively unscathed. So he was injured and he went home to Nagasaki. 3 days later, he was at work sharing his crazy story of how he saw the atomic bomb get dropped. And then, if you know your history, the second atomic bomb was dropped and the dude survived again. He took back-to-back atomic bomb bombings and walked away with an earache. This dude could very well be immortal or at least radiation proof. At number 10, we have Orlando Bloom. We'll kick off this list with a man who's so handsome it would probably make more sense if he actually was immortal. His cheekbones are so sharp he could cut with them, and then he would use that to build a nice romantic fire and then stare deep into your eyes. Only if dreams really did come true. Well, this heartthrob has been making more than hearts just throb for maybe over 100 years because he looks a lot like this Romanian painter. This guy is Nicolae Grigorescu, and the two of them have a striking resemblance. Maybe they just look similar. Maybe they were separated at birth. Well, the latter obviously isn't the case because all of you at home can tell how old this picture is. In fact, it's from 1877. So has Orlando been giving sweet dreams to all the girls since before he was chasing around Jack Sparrow and saving Middle Earth? I hope so. I never want those luscious locks and diamond jawline to go away. We need it. Number 9, Alex Chu. Now there's no way of really proving you're immortal. It's something you would just have to trust someone on. And since no one has done it before, you can bet most people who say they aren't actually immortal. And this guy might be one of them. Alex Chu is 48 years old and the dude says he's unlocked the secrets to immortality. He says he has done this through what he calls immortality rings. I feel like you guys all know where this is going, but I'm just gonna keep breaking down Alex Chu's philosophy for you. So he claims he uses these rings to make his cells regenerate. So these rings basically turn you into Wolverine. Oh my god, why didn't I think of that? Or any of the other billions of people living on this earth. He made these so-called power rings by modernizing ancient Chinese medicine. And here's the best part that I know you've all been waiting for. You can buy these rings on Amazon. Yes, the power of eternal youth can be yours for just 6 easy payments of $49.99. Why wait on living forever when you can start right now? I think you can always tell when someone's trying to screw you over if they're trying to sell you something in the process. Number 8, Leonard Jones. You know, if you get the nickname Live Forever, you might be the guy who's actually figured out how to beat the Reaper. Either that or everyone around you is mocking you, like when they call a guy who's 4'11" big guy.
Go ahead and attack me, big guy.
Oh my god. Oh my god. I just
I never got tired of that clip. Well, Leonard Jones was a politician back in the 1800s, and he had a lot of people convinced that he was immortal. He even ran for president on a campaign about being immortal, and he said he was going to make his voters immortal. That's a bold move, dude. Like, how do you plan on getting the young voters? Magic. He didn't end up becoming president, obviously. I think because his keys to becoming immortal were you were never allowed to be immoral, and that you had to pray a lot. I think that everyone was like, I would rather have sex and die than live my whole life a huge nerd. And it seems like he didn't follow his own rules because at age 70 he died. Or maybe he just tricked us and he's still alive somewhere, watching all of us have fun and party while he's not allowed to eat shellfish. Number 7, Betty Lou Oliver. I mean, we've all had bad days. Sometimes you wake up and everything starts going wrong. You go to make your coffee and you're out of coffee. You go to have a shower and the pipes froze. You check your Facebook and someone leaked your nudes. But nothing can match the level of trash Betty Lou Oliver went through. It was New York in July of 1945. There was a major fog that was covering the city, so all the planes that were flying through had to do so in incredible visibility. I'm pretty sure back then if you had to land a plane, you did it with luck and a wish from a genie. Well, one of these planes got lost in the fog and smashed into the Empire State Building. This killed 11 people and sent Betty Lou flying back, breaking a bunch of her bones, including her pelvis. Betty got put into the no-love plan. When police and paramedics arrived to rescue her, they had to take her down the elevator because she obviously couldn't walk with a broken pelvis. When they were going down, the elevator cord snapped and she fell 75 stories. And Betty Tough as Nails Oliver survived, while breaking the record for surviving the longest elevator fall. I mean, if she's not immortal, she's got at least 5 stars on durability, but just 1 star for luck. Number 6, Boris Kiprianovich. In the year 2000, there was a kid who started to get some big time fame because he told everyone that he was immortal. Not only that he was immortal, but that he came from Mars. We got a combo one here, a Martian that can live forever. And if you're wondering if he's got more crazy theories about himself, he does. Now that he's older, he claims that he used to take trips between here and Mars so he could do surveillance on the human race, and that other Martians do this too. We never see them because they live underground. Way to spill the beans, dude. If there are Martians underground, they're probably like, what the hell, man? Why are you blowing up my spot? Number 5, Roy C. Sullivan. This is another person on the list who has the worst luck imaginable. If you thought falling down an elevator shaft with a broken pelvis was unlucky, try getting struck by lightning 7 times. Roy C. Sullivan has the record for the most times struck by lightning, and it never took him out. He got burned a few times but never died. He's probably carrying around an amulet of Zord, which gives you +7 to lightning resistance. He shot himself in 1993, but that might have been him faking his own death because people were starting to catch on that this guy can't be killed. Number 4. The Wandering Jewish Man. This is a perfect case of knowing when to shut your mouth. The story of the Wandering Jewish Man is that he had front row tickets to the crucifixion, and as Jesus was passing him with the cross, he told him to pick up the pace. So Jesus did the sly move of putting a curse on him so he would walk the earth until Jesus returned for the second coming. Bad move, dude. If this story is real, I bet this guy probably has a podcast where he talks about what the Jets need to do to win a Super Bowl, even though he's never played football a day in his life. This guy probably has never learned. Number 3, Gene Roddenberry. All of you Star Trek nerds out there know this guy. He's the creator of Star Trek. He made one of the greatest franchises of all time for keeping the antisocial entertained. Well, what you might not know about this legend is he survived 3 plane crashes. This dude did Unbreakable before Bruce Willis had his first headshots. And these weren't simple little crashes. A bunch of other people died in these crashes. Gene may just be immortal, and that's why he survived. One of these planes was even on fire before it went down and then smashed right into a desert. They say he died from a heart attack, but I wouldn't be surprised if the aliens came down to give him some ideas for a new run of Star Trek, and then they all became good buds and he just decided to take off with them. I mean, if he is immortal. Number 2 on the list, the immortal monk. In 1926, the Buddhists had a big time stress. They're all trying to chill out and become enlightened and stuff, and then Stalin made the call to kill all these dudes. How are you gonna kill a bunch of Buddhist monks, dude? All they want to do is sit cross-legged and not get bothered by YouTube ads. Well, the leader of this tribe of monks told his followers to go into hiding while he went into a deep meditation. He said he would come out in 75 years, and this guy was meditating to win. He was buried in the lotus position, and then 75 years later, he was dug up and he was dead. However, his body was in pristine condition for how long it had been buried. It was like McDonald's used the same stuff they used to keep their food preserved. They used on this monk so he wouldn't rot away. The monks from his village believe that he's in such good condition because he's still in a meditative state, and he will return when he's ready to break from living in nirvana. If I was him, I would wait till after we fix global warming. Number 1 on the list is Qin Shi Huang. This guy was the emperor of China, and his dynasty lasted over 400 years. He was a huge hit with the people too. They were so in love with him that they thought he was a god and he was destined to live forever and rule over them forever. He humored his followers by sending out people to try and find all sorts of fountains of youth. I want people to like me so much. I want them to want me to live forever and me to be their king forever. It must be so good for your self-esteem. What ended up happening was he poisoned himself with mercury. Back then they thought the cool liquid metal could make you live forever, but it just makes you go crazy and then you die. Or did it work and now he's part of the shadow government that runs the world? Really, either or is possible. At number 10 we have Ashwatthama, an invincible warrior from Indian mythology. This guy is a tank who could take on entire armies single-handedly. This guy is a cross between Thor and Kratos. This dude is unstoppable. He's fought in several battles and was never killed. He's said to have mastered over 64 different forms of martial arts and possesses a great intellect of all weaponry. This could have just been a myth passed down from generation to generation, but many myths are rooted in a little bit of truth, like the myth of the werewolf was most likely based on rabies. Some people believe that Ashwatthama was an actual warrior who never died in battle because of his great skill, but also because he could never be killed. This juggernaut would be hanging out in the shadows waiting for someone to try and put the pressure on India, and if they did make this brutal mistake, he would spring into action and remind everyone why this legend has never died. At number 9 we have Methuselah. If there was anyone believed to be immortal from the Bible, it was this dude. Methuselah was the grandfather of Noah, who built the famous ark. Well, Noah built the ark, not this guy. Don't get confused in my language. There is nobody in the Old Testament that matches this guy when it comes to being an old geezer. This guy holds the record for the oldest guy in the book. Unless you count God, but that's kind of cheating. I mean, he's been there since the beginning. And this guy really lived his life to the fullest. He didn't even have kids until he was 187. I can imagine all the girls had the talk with him along the way. He was like, baby, I'm not ready to settle down. I'm only 108. I got my whole life ahead of me. The Old Testament says he lived until he was 969, which is a bummer. He was so close to 1000. That would have been an amazing party. But it wasn't old age that killed the original millennial, but it was the great flood brought down by God Almighty. But what if this guy was a really good swimmer and he was able to outlast the flood? I mean, he was able to outlast the aging process, so I could believe he could tread water for a very long time. At number 8 we have Jesus. Let's keep on the Bible theme with the guy who is the Son of God. I mean, I think he's the Son of God. I never went to church. Please don't get mad at me if I got this wrong. I don't know how it works. It said there'll be a second coming of Christ, and even if there isn't, he was able to endure a lot. Even 7 days hanging on a crucifix, people checking his pulse, confirming he's dead, and then him being locked up in a tomb for 3 days, Jesus just bounced back like me after 2 espressos. So I think it's safe to say that Jesus is immortal. But this is a list of scary things, and Jesus is maybe the nicest person that has ever lived. He is literally the symbol of kindness. So why would I put him on? Well, there are some people that believe the second coming of Christ will also bring rapture, the end of days, fire raining down from the sky and ruining my favorite burrito stand. If Jesus is in fact alive and waiting for the right opportunity to come back, then there might be a whole bunch of other stuff in the Bible that could come true, which is a very spooky future. At number 7 we have Qin Shi Huang. This dude is one of the most legendary figures in Chinese history. The Qin dynasty helped shape China and really built the foundation of the China we knew for centuries to come. You know the Great Wall of China? That was this guy. You know the Terracotta Army? That was also this guy. You know panda bears? Well, that wasn't him. Panda bears, like, they naturally, however happened, I don't know. But if he had the opportunity to make a cuddly new mascot for the face of China, he totally would have. He was so loved by his people that they believed him to be immortal, and they even sent out servants all over the globe to try and find the secret of eternal life for him. Unfortunately, all the men he sent out were unsuccessful. Big surprise. And Big Papa Quinn died in 210 BC. Or did he? Some people think think that his servants were successful in finding the key to eternal life. They brought it back to him. He used it, but he understood it was too powerful for just any man to get his hands on, so he had to hide the elixir, faked his own death, and has been running China in the shadows ever since. Whoa. At number 6 we have Tithonus. This one is pulled right out of Greek mythology and sticks to the theme of classic Greek myths by being depressing and ill-omened. Tithonus was one of the princes of Troy, one of the most noble houses in all of Greece. He caught the eye of Eos, the goddess of dawn, and even though Tithonus was just a mortal, she wanted a piece of that guy. I mean, it makes sense. This guy was basically a prince from ancient Greece. I bet he had abs you could break a brick on and a face carved out of marble. Well, the two fell in love, and Eos being a god, she would live forever. She wanted her lover Tithonus to live forever with her, so she begged Zeus to grant him eternal life, which he did. But Eos made a grave mistake. She only asked Zeus to grant him eternal life, not eternal youth. Zeus is so petty. So Tithonus could not die, but he was aging brutally. Eventually he was a vegetable and Eos turned him into a cicada for some reason. So if you ever see a cicada that you just can't kill, it might be Tithonus who is just bummed out because he got the bad end of a really bad deal. At number 5 we have Vlad the Impaler, the ancient king of what is now Romania. This man is known to be one of the most brutal men who has ever existed. He was born in 1428 and died in 1477, and in that time he maimed, tortured, and displayed so many bodies he got the nickname Vlad the Impaler. But why is he on this list if he's dead? Or is he dead? The legend of Dracula comes from this guy. It was due to his brutality, but what if he was actually the Dark Lord? He might be roaming around sucking people's blood all throughout Europe. Doesn't it make it easier to sleep at night knowing vampires might be real? At number 4 we have Diane de Poitiers. Back in the day, people didn't really know a lot about science. They would usually just put shiny stuff on things and hope for the best. Like when people used to put mercury on the top of top hats to make them shiny, and then people went crazy from mercury poisoning. We have a similar case with Diane de Poitiers, who was a mistress of King Henry II. She would drink a gold elixir to try and keep herself young. She died at the age of 66, and her autopsy showed that she had chronic gold poisoning. But what if she didn't die? She was known for her youthful beauty. That was probably the main reason that King Henry had her as one of his mistresses. And after she died, she was casted out from the kingdom because she was constantly seducing the king. That makes sense. But what if that was all a cover-up? Follow me down the conspiracy road for just a moment. What if her elixir worked and she shared it with King Henry? He then faked his death and was able to escape the public eye. After that, Diane de Poitiers exiled herself to be with her now new lover, and they're both in the Illuminati.
You're in the middle of this beautiful sci-fi environment.
It's just something
So
you can't get
respectful.
anywhere else.
It's amazing to
I don't remember
watch.
which one I did.
Sounds pretty airtight if you ask me. At number 3 we have Leonard Jones. I love Leonard Jones because I can always appreciate a good con man. This guy was born in 1797 and had the dreams of
We keep
becoming a
jumping in
great
the
politician.
text,
But he didn't do that through a campaign of
in the
more
comments,
jobs and
man.
tax breaks. Oh, no, no, no. His campaign platform was vote for me and I'll make you immortal. A very ballsy move if you ask me. But it worked. He was never able to become president of the United States, but he was able to become a strong contender. To be honest, if someone had this as their platform, I would be pretty on board. Who needs a president to offer a better living situation for the modern family when this guy is saying you can live forever? That's a way better deal. At number 2 we have the 3 Nephites. Before Jesus moved on from us as we knew him in flesh and blood, he chose 12 apostles. 3 of them chose to stay behind with mankind to help make sure we stayed on track. They were called the 3 Nephites. Since then there have been stories of kind strangers guiding kings and stopping violence all throughout history. After these mystery men help out, they disappear, never to be seen again. This could be the Nephites hiding from us, waiting for the right moment to help. At least one of them probably works for WikiLeaks right now. And for our number 1 spot, we have Charles Edouard Brown Saccard. Alright, for the number 1 spot, we have a man who, like many of the other people on this list, thought he discovered the Fountain of Youth. The reason I put him at number 1 is because of the ingredients he used, and he was actually a very respected scientist for his time. Charles lived throughout the 17th century and was known for his extensive studies about the human brain, but his reputation would be tarnished when he went public with what he thought was the Fountain of Youth. He concocted a serum that he claimed could help a person live forever, and the main ingredient was guinea pig testicles. He was so confident in his discovery that he started giving it out for free. He's now of course dead, but the scary part about this is what if he was right? What if guinea pig testicles hold the answer to everlasting youth? I mean, it wouldn't really be scary for us, but it would be so scary for guinea pigs.
Starting off this list in our number 10 spot, we have the mushroom of immortality. As early as 475 BCE, there are written records that reference the mushroom of immortality, which was the key ingredient in the elixir of life. The lingzi, which is translated to mean supernatural mushroom, is the oldest known mushroom to be used medically, which is super cool. According to the Book of Han, people who were masters of esoterica, alchemists, and magicians, known as the Fang Shi,
Hey,
knew the
what's
secret
going on? What's going
locations
on?
on
Thank you
Mount
for
Penglai,
stopping by.
where these
Tell everybody else to
immortality
jump
mushrooms
on.
grew,
And
but
make
no
sure
one
like to
else
keep
did.
commenting
This
and
resulted
stuff.
in several Qin and Han emperors who sent
How we
large
gonna find out
expeditions
the
to
shack
search
okay.
for the mushrooms of immortality, but to no avail. While these mushrooms are still used in traditional Chinese medicine today, it doesn't seem as though anyone has been
Oh, I
able
don't think
to
you heard me. I
actually
think the
achieve
ad is running.
immortality from them, but maybe we just don't have the correct recipe anymore. In our number 9 spot today, we have Amrita. There's a collection of Vedic hymns called the Rig Veda, and according to these Hindu hymns, Amrita, which is sometimes called Soma, is a drink that can give someone immortality. Rig Veda 848.3 says, "We have drunk Soma and become immortal. We have attained the light, the gods discovered. Now what may foeman's malice do harm to us? What, O immortal, mortal man's deception?" While Amrita and its consumption by humans has been well documented throughout history, the knowledge of where to get it has been lost. It is believed to have been some sort of plant or fungus, and the instructions for the preparation of it involved things like pounding parts of the plant into a paste or to release its juices. It would then sometimes be filtered through wool and then mixed with cow's milk before being consumed. Amrita was often said to have been found in mountainous regions, but despite there being such detailed accounts of its use, the true identity of it has been lost, and now sometimes ritual prayers will include an apology to the gods for the lack of Amrita. In our number 8 spot today, we have ambrosia. This is sometimes known as the nectar of the gods and is often referred to in ancient Greek mythology. It is unclear if ambrosia and nectar were originally separately distinguished, but as of now it is commonly accepted that nectar is usually the drink form, with ambrosia being the food form, but regardless, this is the food and drink of the gods. Apparently nectar can be translated to death overcoming, and that makes a lot of sense. In mythology, this drink is usually said to have brought longevity or immortality to whoever consumed it. It was brought to the gods in Olympus by doves, and it was served by either Hebe or Ganymede at the heavenly feast. The consumption of ambrosia was usually reserved for divine beings and can be seen in stories like when Heracles is given ambrosia by Athena upon his transition into immortality. In our number 7 spot today, we have the Epic of Gilgamesh. The first known instance of the search for immortality is found in the Epic of Gilgamesh. In it, Gilgamesh fears the fragility of life after the death of his companion Enkidu. Because of this, he seeks out Unapushtim. This guy is a similar figure to Noah in Mesopotamian mythology, who was a servant of the great alchemist of the rain who ended up later becoming immortal. So Gilgamesh is searching this guy out to seek the answers to immortality, and when he finds him, he tells him to abandon his search for immortality, but he also gives him a trial to defy sleep if he truly wishes to be immortal. Spoiler alert, Gilgamesh fails the trial. After this, the guy tells him about a plant that can make him young again. This plant is located at the bottom of the sea, and Gilgamesh does end up obtaining it, but it is soon stolen by a serpent. I guess using this story as reference, it would appear as though there's some sort of trial that can grant immortality, but when all else fails, there might just be some sort of plant at the bottom of the sea that will do the trick. Just gotta watch out for those sneaky snakes. In our number 6 spot today, we have metal. Metals are pretty strong usually, and some seem to be even indestructible, so it would totally make sense that there was once a train of thought where if a human consumed these metals, they too would take on the properties of being strong and indestructible, right? Flawed logic aside, this really once used to be the way of thinking. Mercury was a metal that was astounding to alchemists. A metal that is in liquid at room temperature? While that might have been super cool at the time, the poisonings that were about to happen in the name of immortality certainly were not. The Roman god Mercury is the equivalent to the Greek god Hermes and the Egyptian deity Thoth. All of these figures are said to have consumed liquid gold or white drops in order to achieve immortality, and it's these stories that caused ancient and medieval alchemists to believe that if they could either find a way to suspend gold in liquid form or mix gold and mercury together, then they would have found the recipe to immortality. In our number 5 spot today we have Nicholas Flamel. If you're a Harry Potter fan, you've definitely heard this name before, but did you know that the character is actually based off of a real person? Nicholas Flamel lived from 1330 to 1418 and he was a successful French bookseller. What's curious, however, is that about 200 years after his death, there began to be texts that surfaced that were attributed to him. According to these texts, Nicholas had learned the secrets of alchemy from Jewish alchemists while traveling in Spain, and it is said that during this time he acquired the original copy of the Book of Abramelin the Mage. It was then claimed that Nicholas was the one who held the elixir of life as well as the secrets of transmutation, and it was also claimed that he was probably still alive somewhere. In our number 4 spot today we have the Philosopher's Stone. While we're on the topic, we might as well talk about another story from history that relates to the infamous stone. There is a legend that suggests that the stone is located in a creek in Philadelphia. In the 17th century, a group called the Society of Women in the Wilderness settled in the woods outside of the Germantown section of Philadelphia. This group was led by an occultist named Johannes Kelpius, and he believed that the world was going to end in 1694. The group spent most of their time in caves and peaceful meditation, just living their best lives, and you might be sitting there wondering why I'm talking about this. Rumor has it that Johannes actually had the Philosopher's Stone as he was its guardian, and he kept it hidden inside of his meditation cave. It is said that before he passed away, he explained the secrets of the stone and instructed the women of the group to toss the stone into the nearby creek after he passed, to which they obliged. Today, this meditation cave is still accessible and it is now marked as a historic site. In our number 3 spot today, we have the Moon Rabbit. The Moon Rabbit comes from Chinese folklore and is usually depicted while holding a mortar and pestle to mix up the elixir of immortality. In the lore, the Moon Rabbit is the companion of a goddess who lives on the moon. In some stories, she is a mortal human, and in others, she is an outcast deity who consumed too much of the elixir of immortality and floated up to the moon. There are some stories, however, that claim that she consumed too much of the elixir on purpose to float up to the moon to get away from her husband. Either way, it's clear she had too much, but floating up to the moon sounds like kind of a fun time. In our number 2 spot today, we have the Fountain of Youth. The Fountain of Youth has been written about for thousands of years. It is said to be a spring that allegedly restores the youth of anyone who is lucky enough to bathe in or drink the waters. There are so many stories of the mythical Fountain of Youth, it has led many explorers and adventurers to set out in search of it. This legend really gained a lot of notoriety in the 16th century when it became associated with the Spanish explorer Juan Ponce de Leon, who was the first governor of Puerto Rico. It is said that while he was searching for the Fountain of Youth, he actually found Florida in 1513, which I gotta admit, probably isn't the same at all. Legend goes that at the time he was in Florida, the indigenous people told him that he could find the Fountain of Youth in Bimini. In our number 1 spot today, we have the Benjamin Button jellyfish. Well, it seemed fitting to end off today's list with one that's a little bit more recent, and this discovery may be the real, actual key to immortality. This jellyfish was first discovered in 1883, but its superpower wasn't actually realized until the 1990s. What makes this jelly so special is that it has the ability to transform its adult self back into a baby, and it can't only do this just once, it can do it over and over again. To be totally honest, a lot of these jellies do die in the good old-fashioned way, but when in an emergency situation such as starvation or physical damage or something along those lines, instead of quickly meeting death, these jellies can transform all of their existing cells into a younger state. The jellyfish will turn itself into a blob-like state, and then it will develop into a polyp colony, which is essentially the first stage in the life of a jellyfish. Researchers are of course looking into how this is possible for the jelly, as well as trying to find out how this could be used to help humans as well. Maybe the key to immortality has really just been swimming around in the ocean this whole time. Starting off this list in our number 10 spot, we have the Brown Sicard Elixir. Charles Edward Brown Sicard is not only the fanciest sounding name, but it's also the name of a French neurologist who lived from 1817 to 1894. In his later life, after a life full of studying and practicing medicine, medicine, he was appointed as the professor of experimental medicine, where he stayed until his passing. He made many medical milestones throughout his life and was one of the first to conduct an in-depth study of the spinal cord, which is of course of the utmost importance for our health. He was also among the first to propose that there are substances that exist in our bloodstream, and those things are what we now know as hormones. This is all to say he made some extremely important medical advancements and was a highly regarded doctor, but of course we all have our quirks, and this is where Charles comes in. At the age of 72, Charles claimed that he had found a way to increase vitality, rejuvenate, and prolong life. Maybe not achieve full immortality, but still, he thought he was onto something here. The method of doing this was extremely strange, as he would inject fluid taken from the nether regions of male animals like dogs and guinea pigs and then inject it into his thighs. Some people even tried this method in a sort of DIY situation and they claimed it worked. In the most unsurprising news ever, the medical society was super skeptical and conducted experiments and found that there was no actual effect. Who could have possibly seen that coming?
Gift size matters. Bigger? No. Pocket-sized? Perfect.
In our number 9 spot today, we have Anger, a Greek god. Many people generally look at immortality as a good thing or a positive. In fact, it's well documented throughout history of people trying to achieve immortality, but in the times of ancient Greece, it was sometimes given as a punishment. In Greek mythology, there are plenty of times where a god would get mad at a mortal and the punishment would grant them everlasting life, but that included a punishment that would literally never end. Like the perfect example is the mortal king Sisyphus. He was always trying to be a smart aleck and would often attempt to barter with the gods rather than simply bow down to them, and at that point all the gods were super fed up with him. In the end, they eventually cursed him to live forever in Hades, where he has to constantly roll a boulder up a hill. Once at the top, the boulder rolls back down and the process repeats. Legend has it that he's still pushing the boulder up that hill to this day. In our number 8 spot today, we have cinnabar. Cinnabar is the most common ore of mercury and it has a long history in ancient cultures, but of course there's one big issue with it. It causes mercury poisoning. This is exactly why it's super strange that this was once the central ingredient to the Taoist elixir of immortality. The elixir, which was called Huandan, or the reverted elixir, was basically created because it was believed that certain materials, such as cinnabar or gold, when ingested, would instill some of their qualities into the body and then rid the body of any of the imperfections that cause mortality. Of course, we now know that unfortunately most of the precious items in this elixir were highly poisonous, and they ended up doing the exact opposite of what they intended to do. Many people died, including Tang Dynasty emperors, and it is said that this is part of what caused the shift from trying to find outside substances to create immortality to finding a way to harness one's natural energy in order to gain immortality. In our number 7 spot today, we have ambrosia. Said to be the drink of the Greek gods with a flavor of honey, this beverage was delivered to the Olympians by doves, and this is what gave them their immortality. This is an important substance in mythology that is seen many times. Sometimes in the stories people were given the privilege of drinking it, like in the story of Heracles. But sometimes others would try to steal it, and like we learned before, do not anger the gods or else you'll find yourselves punished like Tantalus. Forever trapped, hungry, and thirsty, standing in a pool of water he can't drink, under fruit that he can't eat. And some mortals in the story were only teased with the possibility of immortality just to be turned away at the last second, like the hero Tydeus. He was going to be made immortal by Athena, the goddess, but then she caught him eating human brains, so she decided, better not. Mythology is weird. I didn't make this up. In our number 6 spot today, we have the Holy Grail. The Holy Grail is one of the most well-known pieces of Christian mythology. It is said to be a cup or bowl that Jesus drank out of during the Last Supper. Of course, people were trying to get their hands on this relic, and to make it even more revered, it is said to be the vessel in which Joseph of Arimathea caught his blood while he was on the cross. That's heavy stuff, and it's the reason why King Arthur and his knights traveled in search of the Holy Grail. Here's the catch with this thing though. Only the purest of souls were able to grasp it, and not many of us can admit that we're the purest of souls. That is why when only one man was able to touch it, it is said that he gained immortality through it. If that was me, I'd tell him to prove it. I mean, real easy to say it when you're the only one who can touch it. I'm just saying, proof or it didn't happen. Legend says this guy's still eating Mr. Noodles out of it to this day. In our number 5 spot today, we have becoming a vampire. Throughout history and literature and other forms of pop culture, we've seen a few different variations of vampires, none of which exist, but that wasn't always the belief. There were times when people really believed that these things existed, and whether it was the solitary reclusive kind that can't go in the sunlight, or the ones that sparkle when doing so, most vampire legends assume that vampires are immortal and that they don't age. Vampires can be killed, however, and there's actually a few different ways. Sometimes it's from the sunlight, like we talked about. Sometimes it's from not getting enough of the blood they so desperately crave, and sometimes it's by getting a wooden stake through the heart, which is not only effective on vampires, but also regular people. The most difficult part about this method of becoming immortal is that you not only have to find a vampire, which is more difficult than you think, but you also have to find one that's willing to leave you alive. Needle in a haystack here, but I wish you the best of luck. In our number 4 spot today, we have eating a mermaid. This definitely is on the top of the list when it comes to the strange. In Japanese mythology, there is a mermaid creature known as a ningyo, which is described as a cross between a carp and a monkey. These creatures lived in the sea, and they usually brought bad luck and stormy weather with them, and if one washed up on shore, it was thought to be an omen of war. This leaves me wondering why anyone would ever want to be near one, but as legend has it, a girl known as the 800 Nun, one day her father accidentally brought her some of the meat of this creature and she ate it, and then she was cursed with immortality. It was called a curse because she was horribly sad for many years after having to watch many husbands and children of hers pass away. That would absolutely be a terrible part of immortality. After being terribly sad for many years, she decided to devote her life to Buddha and become a nun. In the end, because of her holiness, she was allowed to pass away at the age of 800. I guess maybe immortality isn't as attractive as some of us once thought. In our number 3 spot today, we have the golden apples. We hear a lot about the golden apples in Greek mythology, but in Norse mythology, they're actually quite an important and often discussed item. The golden apples actually needed to be continually eaten by the Norse gods in order to maintain their immortality. The apples also supplied the gods with their strength as well as their forever youth. The orchard that contained these apples was looked over by the goddess of spring, Idun. The apples are extremely important to the mythology, and in one story, when the goddess gets tricked into giving herself and the apples over to Loki, the gods immediately grew old and weak, but luckily she was returned and everyone's youth was restored. This led people to search for these golden apples at one point, but even if they were to find one of these magic apples, you need a constant supply in order to maintain your immortality, and that might be more difficult than you think. In our number 2 spot today, we have the Fountain of Youth. We have all been searching for the Fountain of Youth for centuries, and that's super weird since every beauty company ever claims to have placed it within their moisturizers. One of the most famous stories of the search for the Fountain of Youth is that of Juan Ponce de Leon, who is a Spanish explorer. It is said that he headed out and managed to find Florida, and although it is thought that the adventure was meant to be a search for gold, he was also searching for the Fountain of Youth. This fountain is said to heal the drinker of any known ailments, and it will restore drinkers to the peak of their youth. It is believed that Juan may have had some type of an ailment that he was looking to heal, which is why he set out on his journey. It isn't clear whether or not he ever found it, but it is presumed he didn't, as there's no evidence that he's still alive. In our number 1 spot today, we have the Philosopher's Stone. Turns out this thing wasn't just a Harry Potter relic. It was based on a real thing people believed could grant the power of immortality. It has been long
she was over
believed
there
that
laughing with him, and
then
then she
out of
just started
ordinary
crying.
Substances that exist everywhere, but we just don't have the information needed in order to recognize them. This is why in the first Harry Potter movie, Voldemort is searching for the stone. He's trying to find a way to live again, and he thinks the stone is the key. It is thought that this may have been created by a man named Nicholas Flamel, who yes, is also a character in Harry Potter, but he was also a real person too. Nicholas Flamel lived from 1330 to 1418, and he was a successful French bookseller. What's curious, however, is that about 200 years after his death, there began to be texts that surfaced that were attributed to him. According to these texts, Nicholas had learned secrets of alchemy from Jewish alchemists while traveling Spain, and it is said that during this time he acquired the original copy of the Book of Abramelin the Mage. It was then claimed that Nicholas was the one who held the elixir of life as well as the secrets of transmutation, and it was also claimed that he is probably still alive somewhere. This is exactly why people began searching for the Philosopher's Stone, although it doesn't appear as if anyone has found the proper recipe, I guess, except for Nicholas.
Let's start us off number 10 with Rosalie Lombardo. I wanted to talk about her first because of how well her body was preserved. I mean, just take a look at this picture right here. Honestly, it looks like a little girl sleeping. How long would you guess she's been dead for? Well, if you guess 92 years, you guys would be right. This was just so incredible. She has been embalmed so well. Special embalming techniques were used. All of her organs are remarkably intact. Maybe she can come back to life one day when technology is there. Well, this little girl is just 1 year old. Okay, it's time to up the age by hundreds of years. At number 9, we have La Doncella, Inca Maiden. La Doncella is currently on display so people can see her in Argentina's Museum of High Altitude Archaeology in Salta, which is a city in Argentina. I think this would be so amazing to see one day. La Doncella has been mummified over 500 years ago, and today she still looks like she can open up her eyes and you can just I don't know, just come to life. This particular little girl was the best preserved for the 1500s, and she was actually sacrificed in an Inca religion ritual. Her body froze in the cold on top of a mountain, and it wasn't until more recently when her body was found and then professionally preserved. So scientists can really study the body to find out more about the history and find out who this little girl was. An Inuit baby is up next on this list on number 8. This baby takes us back 537 years ago. This particular Inuit baby was part of a group of 8 mummies found in 1972 grave site in Greenland. The graves dated back to 1475 AD. There were 6 women and 2 children found. This was one of the 2 children that was found and preserved. The woman found at the gravesite had a malignant tumor near the base of her skull, which most likely caused her to die. The Inuit baby is said to be a boy aged about 6 months, and it appeared to have been buried alive with her. Number 7, we have Zinzu. Zin was also known as a Lady Day. Zin gained fame more than 2,000 years after her death because her tomb was just discovered back in 1971. Her body was exceptionally preserved. Along with her body, there was hundreds of valuable artifacts and documents. Her body is now under the care of Hunan Provincial Museum. They are making sure to keep her body perfectly preserved so it can be around forever. Her body does go on display ever so often. Zin was born back in 213 BC, which is so crazy because we get to witness something older than 2,000 years. And it
When we hear that sound, the competition is on.
12,400.
Whoa, he's betting everything. Champions Wildcard, the next generation.
Do you have what it takes for Jeopardy?
Champions Wild Card on Jeopardy, tonight at 7, only on ABC 7.
It's a human we get to see. A human that's over 2,000 years old. Now at number 6, we have a mummy who is 2,200 years old. This right here is the Grabal man, who was discovered back in 1952, perfectly naturally preserved. The man dated back to the late 3rd century BC during the early Chromatic Iron Age. There was wounds found on this man that suggested that he was killed by having his throat slashed. He was most likely sacrificed. His corpse was then put into a bag and was buried. Well, this bag fused to his body, not allowing the body to decompose. Instead, it was naturally preserved. Number 5, we have a 2,300-year-old mummy. This right here is the Tolan man. He was a naturally mummified corpse that dates back to the 4th century BC during the time of the pre-Roman Iron Age. He was discovered back in 1950s in Denmark. His body was actually so well preserved that when he was found in the 50s, he was actually mistaken for a murder that just recently happened. The Tolan man was also likely sacrificed. A lot of people back in the day sacrificed themselves for a greater good. It was a greater good for their people. There were so many different beliefs back then. We think it's pretty crazy now. Some thought that they do it to please their gods and spirits. Some other reasons were for cannibalism. There just wasn't enough food, so you have to sacrifice your body so the rest can eat. Alright, number 4, we have Ur David. That dates back over 3,000 years ago. Ur David was a part of a group of mummies that was discovered back at the start of the 20th century in China. The cemetery contained 23 mummies, and Ur David was one of the, best preserved ones. Also, his son was discovered right next to him. He had a 1-year-old baby with brown hair. The baby had a blue felt cap on. The clothes found in these mummies help scientists and researchers find, how they lived back then. How did they live 3,000 years ago? Number 3, we have another mummy that dates back 3,000 years ago. And actually, this is a female Torturan mummy that lived around 1000 BC. You can really see what this woman looked like. Her hair still hasn't fallen off. This woman is in her 40s and she still has braids in her hair. If you can look closely, but not too close enough because it's actually a bit freaky, you can see the woman's eyelashes. Her eyelashes are still there. It's just so amazing how this woman was naturally preserved. King Tut makes its way onto this list. Number 2, this is a mummy who's about 3,335 years old. It's so crazy how experts can pinpoint an age of human dating back thousands of years ago. This is a more familiar mummy that we all know because this was an Egyptian pharaoh that dates back to the 18th dynasty. This was well known as a new kingdom or sometimes a new empire period of time. This body was discovered back in 1922 by Howard Carter, and now it rests in the Egyptian Museum for people to see. There were some artifacts in the tomb as well, and those were put on display. Again, I would love to see this in real life. Finally, at number 1, we have the mummy that is 5,300 years old. This right here is the famous Otzi, the Iceman. This is a well-preserved mummy of a man that dates back 3,300 BCE time. This mummy was found back in 1991 in the Otzil Alps, hence the name. He is also Europe's oldest known natural mummy, and he offered an unprecedented amount of information on how people lived back in the day. His body right now is in Italy. I wish I knew that before I went to Italy because I would have loved to see his body. The man is believed to be about 45 years old, which is quite old for the time period. This corpse has been extremely examined, measured, and x-rayed to try to get as much information as we can on it.
Number 10, the dodo. In the words of my roommate, dodo. Classic. Perhaps one of the most infamous extinctions known to man was that of the dodo bird. When humans met the dodo bird, they were literally eaten to death within 80 years, I think, of their discovery. They were easy to catch, and as their name suggests, they weren't the smartest. But guys, there are some really exciting things happening in the world of genetics, and finally, scientists are on the way to bringing them back. After collecting various DNA samples, in January 2016, the University of California announced they have completed the genome sequence of the dodo bird, opening a variety of doors. With this new information, scientists may be able to recover enough DNA to create a clone to implant in the eggs of the closely related modern pigeon. Number 9, the thylacine. The story of the last known thylacine or Tasmanian tiger is very sad. His name was Benjamin, and after thousands of his species were eradicated for fear that they'd eat Australia's cattle, he was the last one left. He was a resident in the Beaumaris Zoo in Hobart for a while, until one night, out of neglect, they didn't let him back into the kennel. He died of exposure, and his body was thrown into a dump. So sad. But Michael Archer believes we owe it to Benjamin to bring him back. There is one surviving sample of the thylacine that was pickled in alcohol. Unfortunately, some of the samples were contaminated by careless human DNA, so people reaching in going, ooh, look, it's so weird, and then dropping it back in. But the teeth contained viable samples. In fact, they were able to splice the thylacine cells successfully with a mouse. Archer even argues that should we be able to bring them back, that they could thrive in the Tasmanian ecosystem still, as not much has changed. As we will discover on this list, there's a lot we can do now when it comes to cloning, so it is only a matter of time before we see them again. Number 8, aurochs. You may have never heard of aurochs, but they are one of the most important creatures to have ever walked this earth. They are the great-great-grandparents of all living cattle today, so I guess you better thank them for the
putting down anything. You better be speaking if you don't know something.
Europe and were responsible for managing biodiversity through grazing. However, this species was hunted to extinction in 1627, but its DNA still lives on. The Toros program aims to bring back the aurochs as a functional wild animal by backbreeding its closest closest relatives. It may not be exactly the same, but they hope to genetically breed this cattle to the point that it resembles as closely as possible the original aurochs, kind of like a modern day equivalent. Number 7, the ground sloth. Somebody warn Kristen Bell because I don't know if she will actually be able to handle this. The ground sloth was a massive version of the sloths we know now that existed around 8,000 years ago. Imagine a sloth combined with a giant bear. So nice. They make the de-extinction list only because we do have DNA samples that have been extracted from a preserved strand of hair, so it could be done. The biggest problem preventing this, however, is the fact that no surviving relatives are large enough to give birth to it. But what scientists may be able to do is grow one in an artificial womb, which scientists in the Netherlands say they are within 10 years of perfecting. Number 6, the Steller's sea cow. When I say sea cow, you might imagine the slow and lovable manatee, and you're not entirely wrong. They kind of look like a cross between a manatee and a sea lion. The Steller's sea cow is an extinct Sirenian marine mammal which is in the same order as the manatee. It used to live in the North Pacific Ocean during the Pleistocene and Holocene epoch and was last discovered in 1741 by the Vitus Bering's Great Northern Expedition, but disappeared by the end of the 18th century. Scientists estimate that climate changes as well as Paleolithic human hunting may have been the reason the numbers were already so low even before Europeans made the last strike. Like some others on this list, however, scientists were able to sequence the genome, which could mean we may see these creatures again one day. Number 5, elephant shrew. It may surprise you to know that though a lot of big awful things might have happened, some good, did come out of 2020. The elephant shrew is just one tiny but apparently mighty example. For just over 50 years, not a single elephant shrew had been spotted, which led scientists to believe that sadly this little long-nosed mouse was a lost species. Since the 1970s, any information derived from the species was found through examinations of historic specimens. But in August 2020, a team of researchers and academics reported the opposite, that they were indeed alive and apparently well. Somehow, these little creatures were able to rebuild their numbers and are now thriving across the Horn of Africa once again. Number 4, the woolly mammoth. Since the film Ice Age came out, I'm sure a lot of us can't picture the animal without imagining like Ray Romano's voice along with it, because that's what we do. But eventually, we may not have to use only our imaginations to see real-life woolly mammoths. Mammoths preserved in the permafrost in Siberia have given paleogeneticists enough data that they have been able to sequence the woolly mammoth genome, which we already know is super important. With this data, they may be able to clone the creature or edit the genetic material to its closest living relative, the Asian elephant. But it gets even cooler than that. In 2019, scientists from Japan and Russia announced a significant step towards this goal. They were able to bring cells of the woolly mammoth back to life. They were able to recover cells from the hind leg of a juvenile mammoth they found in Siberia that was uncovered in 2011. They successfully implanted 28,000-year-old cell nuclei into mouse cells. So though we may be very far off from actually seeing a mammoth, the kind of technology that's being developed here is astounding. Like, it's so cool. Scientists hope that they can use this technology to help prevent whole species from disappearing forever. Bringing back the woolly mammoth has a lot of scientific and ethical boundaries that need to be addressed. For instance, they're social creatures. You'd need to bring back a whole herd. How would you introduce them back into the wild? Yada, yada, yada. But how cool is it that extinction in the future may rarely happen again if we can master this technology? Number 3, the gastric brooding frog. The cooler name of this amphibian is the Rheobatrachus, which were a kind of ground-dwelling frog native to Queensland, Australia. It was one of 2 known frog species that was capable of incubating their offspring within their stomach of the mother. She would swallow her own eggs, her stomach would stop making hydrochloric acid to avoid digestion, and transform her stomach into a womb, essentially. When the anywhere from 20 to 25 tadpoles hatched, the mucus from their gills kept the acid at bay, which was super exciting for scientists because then they could figure out how to do that in humans if they were able to study them. But unfortunately, these frogs disappeared almost as soon as they were discovered. Unfortunately, both species of this weird and wonderful genus became extinct around the mid-1980s, but the scientists, a part of the appropriately named Lazarus Project, plan to bring it back to life. Previous cell samples of this species collected prior to the 1970s have been preserved for 40 years in a conventional freezer. In 2013, Professor Mike Archer and his colleagues announced they were able to successfully grow early-stage cloned embryos containing DNA from the gastric brooding frog. Though it's taking longer than a couple years, the Lazarus Project is still on track to bring this unique creature back to life. But it's also important to note that frogs across the world are dying from the deadly chytrid fungus, and this technology could save them all. Number 2, the quagga. So they actually have brought this back, kind of. The quagga was a type of zebra that used to roam South Africa in herds before European settlers killed them all. But now scientists in Cape Town figured out how to bring them back. Quaggas had stripes very similar to zebras, but they only appeared on the front half of their bodies and are brown along the rear. Eric Harley, the project's leader, discovered that the key to bringing back this animal was through genetics, of course, as we know now. By testing quagga skins, they discovered that they were actually a subspecies of the zebras we know and love. Therefore, it could be possible to manifest the genes through selective breeding, and they were right. They are now in the 5th generation of the breeding process, and already there are less and less stripes and the appearance of a brown color. The next step would be to see if they can exact the pattern and behavioral differences between the quagga and zebras, not just the coloring. So they still got a long way to go, but really cool. Number 1, the Pyrrhian ibex. So technically, this is the only species to ever go extinct twice. The Pyrrhian ibex, or Bicardo, became extinct back in 2000 when a fallen tree fell on the last female Celia. Sad way to go. But scientists were quick to freeze some of the cells in liquid nitrogen. With these cells, they were able to clone a calf in 2003 that was brought to life for only a few minutes before it died. Despite the loss, it was a historic event in history and the first de-extinction. Now they still plan to use the 14-year-old cells of Celia, but first they must see if they are still alive. In addition to this, they are also attempting to clone embryos and implant them in female goats. So they did it once. Who is to say they won't be able to do it again? But maybe.
At number 10, we have the quagga. Once a prolific subspecies of zebra across South Africa, the quagga was sadly hunted to extinction in the 19th century. The decline in population all started after European colonists took to South Africa and hunted the species nearly into the ground as it competed with domesticated animals for forage. By 1878, the wild population was decimated, although some were taken to zoos in Europe in an effort to rehabilitate, but tragically in the end, the breeding programs were unsuccessful and the last captive quagga died in Amsterdam in 1883. That was until about 100 years later when the quagga became the first extinct animal whose DNA was analyzed, and it was then that scientists discovered just how close a match they were to the plains zebra. By 1987, the Quagga Project began, and their mission is to recreate the phenotype of hair coat pattern by selectively breeding the genetically closest subspecies, which, as we now know, is the zebra. The first full of this project was born in 1988, and since its early days, they have seen quite a bit of success. If all goes well, the selectively bred quagga, like zebras, will be released back into the wild. Coming in at number 9, the Cuban macaw. Prior to the 15th century, these vibrant and colorful birds could be found all over the main island of Cuba. But when Europeans landed, they had other plans for these parrots. Although indigenous populations had hunted the species prior to the colonists' invasion, once the Europeans arrived, the amount soared. Many were hunted or traded, while others were sent back off to Europe to live as cage birds, and eventually, by the late 19th century, between the rampant overhunting and habitat destruction, the very last of the Cuban macaws died, making the species extinct. But according to the British writer Errol Fuller, aviculturists are rumored to have bred birds similar in appearance to the Cuban macaw using the genes of a sister species. So who knows, we could be seeing them fly around Cuba in the near future. Coming in at number 8, the Arabian oryx. Historically speaking, the Arabian oryx could have been seen roaming around throughout most of the Middle East. But by the time the late 19th century rolled around, you were not likely to see one outside of Saudi Arabia, and in the 1930s, the only remaining populations were found either in the Negev Desert in the north or the Rub al-Khali in the south. Tragically, it only got worse from there. Starting in the 1930s, it became fairly customary for Arabian princes and oil companies to hunt down the animal, and eventually the hunts grew to employ as many as 300 vehicles at once. By the middle of the 20th century, the northern population was effectively extinct, and finally the last Arabian oryx died in 1972. Thankfully, a few people had the forethought to send a couple off into captivity, and they were effectively reintroduced into the wild a few years later. That being said, they are still an endangered animal, but interestingly, it is the first animal to revert to a vulnerable species after being declared extinct. So it's definitely getting better. Coming in at number 7, Caspian tigers. During their prime, Caspian tigers could be found in Turkey and through much of Central Asia, including Iran, Iraq, and northwestern China. But with the Russian colonization of Turkestan during the late 19th century, their population began to be threatened. The first problem was obviously that the tigers were being hunted by large parties of sportsmen or military personnel. Until the early 20th century, the army was used to clear predators from forests around settlements and potential agricultural lands. In fact, until World War I, about 50 tigers were killed in the forests each year. By the 50s, they became an officially protected species, but even so, by the 1970s, the last remaining Caspian tigers were gone. However, according to recent findings that the Siberian tiger is the closest relative to the Caspian tiger, discussions have been started about introducing the Siberian tiger into a safe space in Central Asia. And hopefully, if they get it right, the tiger would adapt and live successfully where the Caspian tiger once roamed. Coming in at number 6, heath hens. Once an extremely common bird, heath hens were a subspecies of prairie chicken that could have been found just about anywhere across North America in colonial times. However, like many other species, the population was deeply affected by colonizers who hunted them extensively for food. In fact, it has been speculated that at the first Thanksgiving, it was actually heath hens that were served, not wild turkey. However, by the time the 18th century rolled around, the heath hens developed a reputation as being the poor man's food, as it was cheap and plentiful. And as the hunting continued to soar, the heath hens became more and more of a distant memory. By the 1870s, the animal was virtually extinct from the mainland, with only a few hundred left on Martha's Vineyard, until eventually the late 19th century put a hunting ban in to try and keep the species alive after an estimated 70 remained. This worked for a while, but due to a myriad of problems, the last remaining heath hen died in 1932. But there is still hope for them to return. As they are closely related to the prairie chicken, scientists have started researching projects aiming at the de-extinction of the animal using DNA from preserved cells as a basis for restructuring the DNA of greater prairie chickens. So with any luck, heath hens could be roaming around soon again. Coming in at number 5, oryx. Considered to be the wild ancestor of modern domestic cattle, oryx were a species of large cattle that once lived in Europe, Asia, and North Africa. And when I say large, I mean large. Apparently, oryx could reach a height of 6.6 feet at the shoulder and weigh up to 3,000 pounds. However, due to hunting and habitation loss, the oryx became extinct when the last individual died in 1627. However, recreating the extinct
Let's see what you can do. Wow. Amazing. Love. Stunning. I'm obsessed.
Get any Google Pixel 8 phone starting at $10 a month at AT&T. No trade-in required.
Species may not be an out-of-this-world thought according to scientists. Starting back in the 1920s, Heinz Heck, a German biologist, initiated a selective breeding program where he attempted to breed back the oryx using several cattle breeds. Essentially, the idea was to breed out what they had been domesticated for, and the result was called Heck cattle. By the 1980s, herds of Heck cattle were released into the Netherlands, and since Heck cattle have been crossbred crossbred with other European cattle breeds in the hopes of creating a more oryx-like cow. Coming in at number 4, the dodo. Maybe the most recognizable of any extinct species due to just how straight up bananas this bird looked was the dodo. Once upon a time it was found exclusively on the island of Mauritius, but what was
Ma,
most
stay on the
fascinating
stream.
about
Tell
the
them to get
dodo
on
was
there.
that it evolved
And if so,
without
tell them to
any
play with
natural
me.
predators. However, like many animals that evolved in isolation, the dodo was entirely fearless of humans. However, this fearlessness, coupled with its inability to fly, unfortunately made the dodo an all too easy target for sailors. Although contrary to popular belief, it wasn't just hunting that took out the dodos, but the introduction of other animals like monkeys and pigs into their habitat, who destroyed their nests and forced them into a competition for limited resources as well. So, have these cartoon-looking birds actually been brought back since their 17th century extinction? To be honest, not technically. But scientists are trying. Beth Shapiro, a professor of ecology and evolutionary biology at the University of California, said that she has completed fully sequencing the dodo's genome from an ancient DNA based on genetic material extracted from dodo remains, and the next steps are in the works. Next up at number 3, the Tasmanian tiger. The Tasmanian tiger was once a carnivorous marsupial native to the Australian mainland as well as the islands of Tasmania and New Guinea. But beginning in the 19th century, they were perceived as a threat to the livestock of farmers, so overhunting was eventually the largest factor in their demise. Sadly, the last of the Tasmanian tigers was illegally captured in 1936 by Elias Churchill and sold off to a zoo where she stayed until her death. But a return of the Tasmanian tiger could very well happen in our lifetime. In 1999, the Australian Museum began a cloning project for the animal, an endeavor that was initially dismissed as a publicity stunt. But in 2002, researchers successfully extracted replicable DNA from the specimens. Now, fast forward to August of last year, and the University of Melbourne announced it will be partnering with a company called Colossal Biosciences to attempt to recreate the animal using its closest living relative and return it to Tasmania. Coming in at number 2, the woolly mammoth. I'm sure we're all familiar with the gigantic fuzzy ancestor to the elephant because, well, it's probably one of the most famous extinct species recorded. The last isolated population of woolly mammoths lived on Wrangel Island in the Arctic Ocean until roughly 4,000 years ago, and famously the first actual remains of the behemoth were found in Siberia in the late 18th century. Interestingly, at first, the researchers studying them were incredibly confused because they could not understand how a warm climate animal such as an elephant could have wound up in such a freezing cold area. But eventually they put all the pieces together and came to the realization that what they had found were the remains of an extinct animal. Amazingly, since those first few skeptical years, thanks to the cold temperatures in the Arctic, the carcasses of the extinct creature have been super well preserved by ice, allowing scientists to access the DNA in ways that is not always possible. And thanks to that, it is apparently in the works to try and bring the beasts back into the world. In fact, after a genome project for the mammoth was completed in 2015, it has been proposed the species could be revived through various means. So while it hasn't happened just yet, by the sounds of it, it could be any day now. And last up in our number 1 spot, the Pyrenean ibex. While there are many genetic testings in the works along with breeding of similarly extinct species with the hopes of adaptation, if we are talking about an actually extinct animal that has been successfully brought back to life, then the Pyrenean ibex is in a league of its own. During its prime, it was often found in areas like France, Portugal, Spain, and Andorra. However, starting in the late 19th century, their population began to dwindle until eventually the Pyrenean ibex was officially declared extinct in 2000. But the amazing thing about this animal is that unlike any of the others on this list, 3 years after the last one died, scientists used its frozen cells to clone a calf, making it the first and only animal to have a living specimen exist post-extinction. Now, the caveat is that sadly the clone did not survive long after birth. It actually died a few minutes later due to a lung defect. But it did prove that it could be possible to actually bring a species back from the dead.
Starting off in our number 10 spot, we have Homo habilis. Alright, starting off this list, we have the Homo habilis, which is said to translate to meaning handyman. This is a species of humans that evolved in Africa sometime prior to 2 million years ago, so clearly quite some time ago. It is believed that Homo habilis went extinct about 1.5 million years ago. By the middle of the 20th century, it was starting to be accepted that humans first evolved in Africa from an early group of hominins known as Australopiths. Back in 1960, however, a research team in Tanzania found fossils that would sort of confirm this in a way. This fossil was one that sort of fell in the gap between Australopiths and humans as we know them. It was the discovery of Homo habilis, the first true human species to evolve. From what has been found, which is mostly fragmentary fossils, it has been determined that H. habilis seemed to have a brain that was significantly larger than Australopiths and more similar to later human species. It is believed that H. habilis behaved in a human way, like they made stone tools, which at the time was thought to be different than their previous ancestors. This is exactly part of the reason they were named handyman, but at this point in time we now know that Australopiths also made tools, but the name of H. habilis still stands and they're very important in the course of our evolution. In our number 9 spot today we have Homo antecessor. The discovery of this species starts out at a huge archaeological site in Spain called the Gran Dolina Cave. This cave has a rich history, but as relates to this list, at this site, there has been found the remains of a hominin group called Homo antecessor. This discovery came in 1997, and this species is often described as having a mix of modern and quote primitive traits. It was thought that there were similarities with this species between both other species like Neanderthals, but also with Homo sapiens. This was able to be confirmed through DNA sequencing, or really a study of ancient proteins that were extracted from dental enamel of one of the fossils. They were also able to prove that this species was a closely related or sister lineage to modern humans, Neanderthals, and Denisovans, which shows that they all must have shared some common ancestor. In our number 8 spot today we have Homo naledi. Also called the Starman, this species certainly was an interesting one as they had quite an unusual mix of features. It is said that parts of their skeletons would be indistinguishable from modern humans, but there were other parts that seemed almost, quote, ape-like. This species also had a brain that was only slightly larger than a chimpanzee, but they were still capable of sophisticated and more modern human-like behavior. Exactly they went extinct, and it isn't quite clear where they sit in the evolutionary tree, but some experts believed that they may have lived at the same time as we already talked about.
How much
they
you got me?
believed that they probably went extinct more than 1 million years ago after being outcompeted by later species like
You feel like making
H.
this tonight?
There are others who don't agree with this, however, and who believed that this species lived much more recently, but then that begs the question as to how humans who looked so primitive could have survived until so recently. In our number 7 spot today we have Homo erectus. As I just mentioned in the last point, we have Homo erectus, or the upright man. It is thought that this human species also evolved in Africa, this time somewhere around 2 million years ago, and they
not right now, in a second though.
Spread throughout Eurasia. At this point in time, it is debated exactly when this species went extinct, but it is believed to be around 143,000 years ago. While this species isn't the most well known, they are extremely important to our evolution. They looked like and behaved in similar ways to us, and they were the earliest known human species to have migrated long distances, which is not only an exceptional feat, but also really important to our world today. It is believed that this might be the earliest known species who was able to learn how to control fire, and also quite possibly the first to cook their foods. This opened the way for a better diet with improved nutrition, which then paved the way for the evolution of a larger and more demanding brain. In our number 6 spot today we have Homo neanderthalensis. We are talking about the most well-known extinct human species now, the
Oi, what's up?
Neanderthals. How well known
Did
they
that say
are
no?
might be contributed to the fact that they were the first ancient human species to be discovered by scientists around 200 years ago. Neanderthals were thought to have first appeared in Eurasia about 200,000 years ago, and they lived until somewhere around 40,000 years ago.
I know.
It is
I
often
just
said
realized
that
that I came to that
Neanderthals are
conclusion.
like a cousin of us Homo sapiens,
Oh,
and that we
shit.
share
Look
some
at
sort
Ernesto.
of similar parent species with them. Despite these
I'm gonna look like
similarities,
Ernesto
it isn't
Rodriguez.
exactly clear when the split from the line happened
Rodriguez.
between Neanderthals and Homo sapiens, but some believe it may have been over 1 million years ago. Neanderthals are known for their sophisticated tools made from stone and bones, and it is thought that they might have taken advantage of fires that were caused by lightning, which showed that they were, of course, also able to control fire. It is thought that Neanderthals also practiced self-medication and that they made art, which only suggests that they might have been more cognitively advanced than people once believed. In our number 5 spot today, we have the Homo longi. This species is one of the most recently proposed hominin species, and they are thought to have originated in China. The skull that led to the discovery of this species was first found in the 1930s, but it wasn't until recently that it was made available for scientific study and analysis. The skull is thought to have come from about 146,000 years ago, and with this new information, it is thought that this skull might have brought forward a quote long-lost sister lineage of Homo sapiens. The eye sockets of this skull are said to be large and blocky, the molars are much larger than ours would be, and the brow ridge is said to be quite sizable. These are all considered primitive traits, but what's not primitive is the size of the brain, which is completely comparable to modern humans. This discovery is one that just reminds us how difficult it is to designate a new species with such limited resources available in terms of evidence. At this point in time, it isn't exactly clear where they fit in on the evolutionary tree, but it certainly is quite interesting, and it reminds us how complicated human
Even when a what is blown?
In our number 4 spot today, we have Homo rudolfensis. So this
A cold.
is a species that has very little evidence. Really just a single specimen. A skull. This specimen,
And these hands, nigga, these hands.
470 is believed to have come from about 1.9 million
Why is he
years
sneezing
ago,
on me?
and it was found in what was once known as Kubifora, but it is now Kenya. The skull was originally thought to be from the species H. habilis, the one we started this list with, but there were a few problems with this classification. Firstly, the brain case of the skull was quite big. H. habilis had brains around 500 cubic centimeters, but this brain case would have allowed for a brain the size of 700 cubic centimeters. This skull also had large teeth and a smaller brow ridge than what would have been seen on the skull of an H. habilis. This is exactly why experts concluded that this skull belonged to a previously unknown species, even accounting for the differences that might have been seen between males and females. That is exactly why this separate species was designated back in 1986. In our number 3 spot today, we have the Denisovans. So this is a group that was discovered in a completely different way than the other species on this list. For most of the other species, we found fossils or remains that showed their distinct differences from other species, and these discoveries gave us very valuable insights into what their lives might have been like and around when they lived. But the discovery of these guys, we have little to no information on their skeletons, their appearance, or how they behaved, but we still know of their existence, and that's all thanks to DNA and genetics information. So basically, researchers found fragments of teeth and bones that were 50,000 years old in a cave in Siberia. Based on their age and the location they were found, everyone just assumed that the DNA extracted from them would match Neanderthals, but that did not happen. Instead, when they were tested in 2010, it was discovered that these bones belonged to a human species that is estimated to have last shared an ancestor with Neanderthals about 765,000 years ago. Right now, this species hasn't been given a scientific name, and this reluctance is due to the fact that so little is known about them. Through more research, though, which is of course currently ongoing, it is thought that they might be formally recognized as a species or subspecies Homo denisova. In our number 2 spot today we have Homo floresiensis. This species is honestly a bit of an evolutionary mystery or puzzle that is super interesting. It is believed that they lived on the Indonesian island of Flores sometime between 100,000 to 50,000 years ago, but it is also believed that ancestors of this species might have been present on the island at least 700,000 years ago. The puzzling part comes in when we talk about their appearance because it's just so different from ours. They wouldn't have stood over 3 feet tall, they had short bodies, super long feet, and a very small brain. This wouldn't have been all that strange when it came to the earliest human species like H. habilis, when that species was wandering around Africa over 2 million years ago, but we are talking about a species that lives thousands of kilometers away and that was only alive 50,000 years ago. They're also thought to have behaved in a similar way to other early humans, like with the ability to control fire, cook food, that sort of thing. That is exactly why experts aren't quite sure how H. floresiensis fits into the evolutionary tree, but it is possible that they might have found themselves stranded on this island, and that is the cause for their hugely different evolutionary path. In our number 1 spot today we have Homo luzonensis. Another island-dwelling population, this species was discovered on the island of Luzon in the Philippines, and it is thought that they lived there around 50,000 to 60,000 years ago. This species was discovered through just 13 bones from teeth, fingers, toes, and a femur that were found on the island. These remains belonged to 3 different individuals, but they gave us an incredibly valuable insight into this previously unknown species. In 2019, it was determined that these bones were different enough from the other known past human species that they were then classified into their own new species category. It is crazy to think that it's still so recently that we are discovering brand new species that are so important to the history of humans and how we got here today. It is said that the toe and finger bones of this species are quite interesting as they are slightly curved, which is a feature that is shared by living species of tree-dwelling primates. It is thought that this may suggest that for H. luzonensis, living in trees might have still been a part of their life. Starting off in our number 10 spot, we have the splendid poison frog. The splendid poison frog is a species of poison dart frog that was once abundant and thriving and could be found in its habitat in western Panama. Researchers believed that a citrid fungus outbreak in their habitat led to a rapid decline of the species. In fact, this fungus is responsible for the deaths of a mass amount of amphibian species, as the number of amphibians has been dropping at an alarming rate in the last few decades. Because of the fact that these were a species of frog that was once an extremely popular pet, it is thought that there might be unknown specimens which are still alive in captivity, but unfortunately none have been found in the wild, and there aren't currently any that exist in zoos or research collections. The last time one of these frogs was recorded was in 1992, their fungus outbreak occurred in 1996, and as of 2020 they have been listed as an extinct species. In our number 9 spot today we have the moa. These animals were giant flightless birds that could be found in New Zealand. They were so tall that they reached around 12 feet, and they weighed more than 500 pounds. I'm just saying, there are smaller birds that exist today that are honestly pretty terrifying. A 12-foot tall, 500-pound bird is actually a nightmare. While these guys had little predators before human settlement arrived, their populations quickly declined after they began being hunted by humans. It is said that actually within 100 years of human settlement in the area, their extinction occurred. It is said that the moa have close relatives that still exist in South America, and scientists are working to find a way to see if these relatives carry the moa gene, and if so, could they be used to bring back this species of giant birds. In our number 8 spot today we have the western black rhinoceros. The western black rhino was a subspecies of black rhinoceros, and they made their home in the savanna of sub-Saharan Africa. These guys were unfortunately the victims of poaching, which led to their rapid decline. Isn't it a bit ironic? People got so greedy trying to kill these incredible animals so that they could make money, and now they can't make any money off of them because they killed them all. What a genius business plan, and just genuinely good people. Anyways, this species first originated around 7 to 8 million years ago, and for most of the 1900s, it was the highest population of rhino species. That all changed, however, as from 1970 to 1992, the population of black rhinos in general decreased by 96%. Other than poachers, another main culprit for the decline was farmers who killed the animals to protect their crops that were placed close to rhino territories. The last sighting of a western black rhinoceros was in 2006 in Cameroon's northern province, and sadly the subspecies was officially declared extinct in 2011. In our number 7 7 spot today we have the Caspian tiger. During their time on this planet, Caspian tigers were an animal that was native to eastern Turkey, northern Iran, Mesopotamia, the Caucasus around the Caspian Sea, Central Asia to northern Afghanistan, as well as in western China. They were everywhere. Until the Middle Ages, these tigers could also be found in Ukraine and southern Russia, but of course, this is a list of extinct animals, so what led to their extinction? Well, it is believed that the demise of this tiger population started with the Russian colonization of Turkestan during the late 19th century. During this time, the tigers were being killed by large parties of sportsmen as well as military personnel, and they didn't just hunt the tigers, but they also began hunting large numbers of the tiger's main food source. This, plus the fact that much of their home was being turned into agricultural developments, and you have a perfect recipe for causing the decline of a species. As of 2003, the species was officially declared extinct. Some scientists want to try to bring them back by introducing a very close relatives of these tigers into the lands that Caspian tigers once used to roam, where they expect it to adapt. In our number 6 spot today, we have the Morian viviparous tree snail. This was a species of air-breathing tropical land snails that were endemic to French Polynesia. This extinction was caused by a chain of events that happened after something humans did. The African land snail was introduced into Tahiti in 1967 as a food source, but it quickly escaped and began to destroy crops. Biologists wanted to attempt to control the African land snail, so they decided to introduce the rosy wolf snail to the area in 1977. This went haywire as the rosy wolf snail didn't just control the population of African land snails, but rather started to eradicate all of the snails that were native to the area, which of course includes our little friend, the Morian viviparous tree snail. So this one little introduction led to them becoming totally extinct in the wild. These snails do still exist in captivity, and there have been attempts to re-release them into the wild, but the rosy wolf snail continues to prey upon them, so at this point it looks like they will never be able to return to the wild, which is very sad. It sucks that the intention really was to help, but things just did not go according to plan at all. In our number 5 spot today, we have aurochs. These guys are an extinct species of cattle which are thought to be the ancestors of modern domestic cattle. These guys were absolutely massive, one of the largest herbivores that existed during the Holocene actually. It is said that their populations began to decline during the late Holocene, which is due to habitat loss as well as hunting. It is believed that the last individual died in 1627 in a forest in Poland. Many of these creatures are believed to be depicted in cave paintings and even Bronze Age figurines. There are some modern cattle species that carry some auroch DNA, so there are certain teams of scientists who, since 2009, have been selectively breeding cattle in hopes of being able to bring back these long-gone species. In our number 4 spot today, we have the woolly rhinoceros. We talked about another kind of rhino before, but now we have a woolly one. I didn't even know these ones used to exist. These guys were a species that was quite common in Europe and Asia during the Pleistocene epoch, and they survived up until the end of the last glacial period. These guys were an animal that is seen depicted in cave paintings as well, and we have even discovered their bones and remains that were mummified and preserved in permafrost. These guys were stocky and they had a thick woolly coat which helped them survive in the cold tundra environment. In 2020, there was actually one of the best preserved remains of one of these animals ever found, which has prompted questions about possibly reviving the species. In our number 3 spot today, we have the elephant bird. Apparently birds used to be massive, because here we have another species of now extinct giant flightless birds. These guys are said to have once lived in Madagascar, and it is thought that they went extinct somewhere around 1000 to 1200 AD, likely as a result of human activity. It is said that these guys stood to be about 10 feet tall and that they could reach insane weights of 730 kilograms, which would make them the world's heaviest bird. I'm just saying, I'm glad they were flightless. Several of the bones of these birds have been found with tool marks, which means that for years these birds were able to coexist with humans. In the end, researchers are working to see if the remains we have found will be enough to possibly bring this species back into our modern world, and if so, what would the implications be? In our number 2 spot today, we have the Tasmanian tiger. These guys are actually less like tigers that we are used to, and they're actually marsupials, but not really like the marsupials we know today either. These guys are a carnivorous marsupial that was native to Australia mainland in the islands of Tasmania and New Guinea. These guys had anatomy and adaptations that bared similarities to both tigers and wolves despite being unrelated. They were certainly an apex predator at their time, and as of now,
we've all got a wild side. Feed it with meat. Jacklings, feed your wild side.
Their closest ancestors that are still surviving are the Tasmanian devil and the Noombat. Because of these living relatives, it is thought that scientists might be able to bring back these creatures by selecting certain parts of their DNA. In our number 1 spot today, we have the woolly mammoth. We would certainly be missing a very important animal on this list today if we didn't include the woolly mammoth. These guys were of course a species of mammoth, and in fact they were one of the last in line of mammoth species. Because of the fact that in both Alaska and Siberia there were frozen carcasses discovered, they're actually one of the most well-studied extinct creatures. Exactly why or how they were driven to extinction is widely debated, and another thing people like to debate is whether or not we should try and bring them back. There was a genome project completed in 2015, and since then it has been proposed that the species could be revived through a few different means, but no one has yet taken the leap.
Starting off this countdown, we have the California condor. The California condor is the largest vulture and land bird in North America. From tip to tip, its wings stretch about 10 feet. It's got a big wingspan. They also can fly as high as 15,000 feet in the air. Now these vultures used to live all throughout the southwestern US into northwestern Mexico, but during the 20th century their population started to decline due to pesticides, poaching, and loss of habitat. By 1987 there were so few left that scientists declared them extinct. During that time there were only about 27 or less in the wild. But don't worry, the US government actually helped save these animals. They created a captive breeding program and set it up in a number of zoos across the country. This program is said to be one of the most expensive conservation projects in US history. It cost about $35 million and $2 million per year to keep it up. And slowly but surely they helped increase the amount of condors. As of 2019, their population is at 118. Some of the birds have even been reintroduced into the wild. They are still at risk, but all the birds are tagged and the US are keeping a close eye on them to make sure they never get near extinction ever again. In our 9th spot today, we have the Somali elephant shrew. Now don't be fooled, this isn't an elephant, but it does have a long pointed snout like an elephant. It's as small as a mouse and kinda looks like one too, but they aren't actually a shrew. That rhymed. In fact, they are related to aardvarks, elephants, and manatees. You heard me correctly. These tiny little creatures are related to elephants and manatees. How? I don't understand nature. Anyways, the last recorded sighting of this creature was in the 1970s. After that, scientists declared the species extinct. That was until August of 2020. A team of researchers were out doing studies when they came across these tiny little creatures. From there, they decided to try and see how many elephant shrews were left in the wild. So they set up more than 1,000 traps with a tasty treat of peanut butter, oatmeal, and yeast inside. In total, they came across 12 elephant shrews of the same species. Now, thousands of these little guys are back and are no longer threatened or in danger. Moving on to number 8, we have the Bermuda petrel. This is the second rarest seabird on the planet. In fact, it was last seen on Nonsuch Island in 1620. They literally thought it was extinct for over 300 years. They went extinct because their habitat was destroyed by sea erosion and hurricanes. But then in the 1950s, they were like, surprise! No, we're here to stay, we're just playing. So in the 1950s, their nest was spotted east of Bermuda with a few birds nearby. In 1951, 36 of these birds were rediscovered, and as of 2021, their population is increasing. The government created new nesting sites for these seabirds, and as of spring 2020, there are a total of 134 breeding pairs. We went from 18 to 134. Hell yeah. But according to conservation officer Jeremy Madrios, he said, and I quote, "It's an ongoing recovery, an example for threatened species around the world in an era when encroachment on and destruction of habitats is putting more species at risk than ever before." Well spoken. In our 7th spot today, we have the horned marsupial frogs. These little guys are so freaking cute. Like, just look at them. They have like weird pointy eyeball horns. But its eye horns aren't the only thing that makes this frog pretty weird. Its eggs develop in a pouch on the female's back, and when they hatch, you got fully formed frogs instead of tadpoles. That's pretty unusual for frogs. Anyways, these frogs live in the tropical rainforest in Ecuador, but due to habitat loss from oil palm crops, timber, and mining, the frogs went extinct around 2005. They were declared extinct for 13 years until 2018 when they made a comeback. Since extinction, they now have a population of 350 with 18 new species. Moving on to number 6, we have the takahi. The takahi are flightless birds that are native to New Zealand. They honestly kind of look like peacocks without the big colorful feathers. It's because they have the same bluey, greeny colorway. In the 1890s, their population began to decline due to hunting, competition for food, predators, and habitat loss. By 1898, they were declared extinct. But then, 50 years later, a small group of them were discovered high in the Murchison Mountains. As of 2019, the population is 418. It is said to be growing at a rate of 10% per year. Slowly but surely. In fact, the rediscovery of this bird inspired New Zealand's longest running endangered species program. It's been in the works for more than 70 years now, with plans to make sure that this animal or any other animal never becomes extinct again, as well as they help save endangered species. We're now at our 5th and halfway mark with the tarsier. These are one of the cutest animals to ever exist. Just look at it. It looks like a cute little weird monkey, squirrel, alien thing. Like, I want one as a pet. Anyways, this interesting creature is considered a nocturnal primate, but scientists still don't know much about it. One of the reasons being is that scientists thought that they went extinct in the 1920s. But in May of 2000, while checking a rat trap that they had set up in a forest, scientists discovered that they had actually accidentally caught a tarsier. Sadly though, this little dude was dead. But still, they were like, oh shoot, these creatures are back. Then in 2008, researchers found a family of them in Portland National Park. Nowadays, it's believed that there are only 5,000 to 10,000 of these animals in the whole world. And that number is sadly falling again instead of rising. It's because these little creatures don't live too long in captivity. In fact, when they are in distress, they apparently try and take their own lives. So that's a reason why it's hard to look after these little guys and keep them off of the endangered list. In our 4th spot today, we have the golden lion tamarin. But I like to call it the golden majestic monkey. Like, look at this thing! Look at its luscious locks. It's got nicer hair than me. Anyways, this orange primate is located in Brazil's Atlantic forest. But sadly, with its habitat being destroyed, the population is at great risk. In the early 1970s, so few of them were alive in the wild that they were declared extinct. But with the help from the World Wildlife Federation, public charities, and 150 zoos, Brazil's government has been able to help these monkeys. There's now a healthy population of them being looked after by zoos all over the world. Plus, they have already breeded and reintroduced around 1,700 of these majestic guys back into the wild. It's sad, but the main threat these guys face is urbanization of the area. They're losing space to call home, and that's what's putting them at risk the most. Moving on to number 3, we have Catagonus wagneri. Now, these animals are weird because just look at them. They look like gray hairy pigs or warthogs, but, you know, without the little horns. Either way, I still find them cute. Back in the day, this creature was discovered from early fossil records. Then in 1974, a biology professor from University of Connecticut was on a National Geographic research expedition when he rediscovered these creatures. And they are no longer considered endangered or extinct. A huge population of them live in a 2,400 acre area in Gran Chaco. They hide out in the bushy, thorny areas so that they are safe from jaguars and pumas and local hunters. Another huge population resides in the Tagua Sanctuary at the CCCI Conservation Center. In our 2nd spot today, we have the Tasmanian Devil. Not the dude from Looney Tunes. Don't worry, he's still being animated and he as well. Anyways, the Tasmanian Devil used to be found all over the place, but now they are only found on the island state of Tasmania. Around 3,000 years ago, these creatures went extinct because of predation. They were being hunted by the dingo. And then they were hit by the devil facial tumor disease, which is a contagious form of cancer. This spread like wildfire and killed 90% of the population. As a result, they were declared extinct. But over the years, the creatures were reintroduced to wildlife sanctuaries and have been introduced in New South Wales and Australia. This has helped save the population. Plus, the population is thriving in Tasmania, as there are no dingoes there to hurt them. And in our number 1 spot today, we have the coelacanth. The coelacanth, which is spelled nothing like it's pronounced, I thought it would be like coelacanth, but no. I guess not. Anyways, these dudes have the most famous comeback story of all time. These fish were said to have been around when the dinosaurs were alive. That's right, that's how old these dudes are. In the 19th century, that's when scientists discovered a fossil of this fish. The fossils were said to be over 410 million years old. It's said that they went extinct around 66 million
I don't
years
remember.
ago. That was until 1938 when they were rediscovered off the coast of South Africa. That has to be the greatest comeback of all time. They still are critically endangered, but the fact that they managed to survive millions of years is absolutely insane.
In at number 10. Whoa, that guy's fast. What is that? His nose is like so long. Is this real? I don't even know what that is. I don't even know how to research this little guy. Okay, well, apparently that was the elephant's shrew.
Did you ever play this game before?
Over 50
or like when your dad
years
switched?
ago, but it was rediscovered in August of 2020. These mighty little mouse-like creatures are thriving in Africa. Pretty cool something so small was able to evade a full extinction. So before we get into number 9, make sure you guys hit the like button on this video because it really helps us out. Alright, let's see what we have in at number 9.
The Tarsier is named... Whoa. Hello there, freaky. The Tarsier is named after its long, impressive bone in its ankle, you perv.
Okay, whoa, what is this little thing? So the animals on this list are pretty tiny. This one is no different. The pygmy taser of the taser family of the world's smallest primates hails from the depths of Indonesia. The taser still lives, but its pygmy's cousin is said to have been extinct until a man accidentally captured and killed one in a mousetrap in 2000. Since then, several pygmy tasers have been found and tagged in Indonesia, and it is believed that they no longer exist.
Great big, thin, membranous ears and those sharp teeth. More like those you'd see on a bat.
Okay, wait, first of all, I thought these things were cute, but they're pretty creepy if you ask me. Apparently these guys are adept predators for being able to fit in your palm of your hand. Pretty wild, but anyone else getting like the baby Yoda vibes from this?
Perhaps it could live many centuries.
Next up at number 8, the terror skink. Thought once to be extinct. Well, this video shows a man who found one in Caledonia in 2018.
Yo, what's up? What's up? What's
These
up?
little things were said to be the T-Rex of their time. Serious meat-eating predator
Oh, she's over there
reptiles.
eating, I think.
They got their name from their mouthful of sharp teeth.
So this skink is the top predator here on this island in New Caledonia. There's no doubt that this guy is the T-Rex of this.
All right, moving right along. In number 2. So many of you guys think that Bigfoot is an urban legend. Well, I know that it's real. Okay, I never saw it, but like I've seen stuff like on TV and I think it's facts. Well, this creature that is like some kind of like half man, half ape that lives a lonely life in the wilderness, well, that video was from 2020 in Utah. It's pretty far away, so it's hard to tell, but I can tell. That's Bigfoot, confirmed. For sure Bigfoot. But if that's how big that thing looks from far away, like imagine how big it is when you're up close. Maybe like 20 feet. All I know is I wouldn't want to come across one. So this video was uploaded August 1st of this year, 2020. If it's not Bigfoot, then what is it? Let me know in the comment section below, what the heck creature did we just watch? And finally, in at number 1. Okay, so that clip is obviously from a movie. If you guys didn't know, I didn't know at first. I thought it was real. But the Megalodon is said to be a real creature, and we couldn't not put this on this list. This is a real and verified clip of what was thought to be a megalodon underwater filmed in Japan. There are reports that the megalodon was found a couple years ago in Marianas Trench, hence the movie, hence the inspiration for the movie. Well, it was found in the Mariana Trench a couple years ago, and there was all the fuss around this creature from some of the well-known sources like Shark Week and obviously Hollywood movies that hyped this creature up. Considering 95% of the ocean has not yet been discovered by humans, it could be very possible that this thing is real in 2020, and there's probably so many other creatures.
Kicking off the list at number 10, passenger pigeons. Commonly confused with the mourning dove, the passenger pigeon once ruled the skies over Canada as recently as the 19th century. They're quite similar to the pigeons that we see every day in the city, only instead of being aggressive and, covered in mayonnaise, they were graceful, dare I say. They were beautiful. Billions of these bright orange birds would paint the skies, and rumor has it, they would fly in flocks so large it would block out the sun for about an hour or a long period of time. Flocks that block, how incredible is that? But only a few decades passed and passenger pigeons are no more. What happened? Well, the very last passenger pigeon was Martha. Yeah, Martha passed away in the Cincinnati Zoo back in 1914, so we took a look at her DNA to see if Martha held any secrets to their extinction. They discovered that Martha had a low genetic diversity for such a growing population. It's our growing population, guys. It's because we wanted to, now we can't have any Marthas. Natural selection and hunting eliminated arguably the coolest looking bird out there. Hashtag save Martha. Number 9, the smooth-hand fish. Not to be confused with Cool Hand Luke, the smooth-hand fish was the first time in modern history where a marine-type fish went extinct. How? Okay. This fish was a shallow water bottom dweller, and I personally love him because he looks so angry all the time. He looks like one of Bowser's minions. He looks like he's in a terrible mood. He has a horn that protrudes out of his face, so honestly, I don't blame him, TBH. Just 200 years ago, you would have seen these smooth dudes in the land down under. It lived in Australia, in Tasmania's warm waters, and what made this fish so unique, as its name hints towards, is its hands. Not its jazz hands, but its smooth hands. He has some little smooth hands. The smooth-hand fish would seemingly walk along the ocean floor. It uses its fins as hands. So an angry-looking fish with a horn coming out of its face would walk towards you slowly underwater. That's not terrifying at all. Hard pass. Graham Edgar, marine ecologist at the University of Tasmania, shed some light on its habits, explaining that these fish were homebodies. They didn't have a large habitat. They spent most of their time sitting in the seabed with an occasional flap for a few meters if they're disturbed. Just an occasional. At that point, they would just walk away with their hands just away from the drama. Number 8, the great auk. Its name makes you think that this is the size of a moose or it's some type of ox, when in fact it's really just a cute flightless seabird. Look at it. Once thriving in colonies off North Atlantic coasts, the great auk would grow up to 30 inches long, and its tiny wings, though, would only be used to swim. Little penguin flappy arms, no wonder they couldn't fly. Look at those things. They were cute and also quite defenseless. Around the 1500s, European fishermen discovered this perfect area for hunting, and it just happened to be where most of these great auks were hanging out. Newfoundland literally looked like the iceberg in Club Penguin. It was packed. It was a great time, but that's how they rapidly declined. By 1950, the last 2 known specimens were hunted by a single fisherman on Eldey Island, just off the coast of Iceland. Way to go, dude. Number 7, the giant tortoise. When the Mayans said the world was going to end in 2012, honestly, they may have just been onto something. 2012 was also the year we lost the last Pina giant tortoise. His name was Lonesome George. He was by himself, as his name suggests, and for decades before his passing, scientists were trying to get him to with females of a similar subspecies, but he just wasn't feeling it. Man was tired. I mean, look at him. The guy looks exhausted already. He looks like he needs 3 coffees before swiping right on mating apps. Lonesome George and his wrinkly-necked friends weighed in at about 400 pounds, growing up to 6 feet long. They were massive. They were beautiful, big-neck boys. Again, this extinction comes back to us humans, with the use of tortoises as an onboard food in the 19th century and the goat population growing rapidly during the 60s and 70s, these tortoises were screwed. They ran out of food and they were just becoming food. Double whammy, double negative. Number 6, Chinese paddlefish. The Chinese paddlefish was one of the largest freshwater fish in the world, commonly measuring around 3 meters or 9.5 feet long. These fish were native to the Yangtze and Yellow River basins in China. It was one of just 2 in the paddlefish family, so pretty rare. Since the 1900s, this fish has been listed on the critically endangered list, with the 2 main culprits, of course, being, well, us, overfishing, and habitat fragmentation. Unfortunately, in December 2019, because of several surveys that failed to locate any presence of this species, it has since been declared extinct. I hope that somewhere out there, there's a little colony of paddlefish hiding just somewhere and we just can't find them. Keep hiding, don't let us find you, we'll just fuck it up again, probably. Sadly, it's believed that this fish went extinct somewhere between 2005 and 2010. Number 5, Western Black Rhinoceros. The Western Black Rhino was a subspecies of the black rhinoceros, and they made their home in the savanna of the sub-Saharan Africa. These beautiful beasts were sadly the victims of poaching. That was the main cause that led into their rapid decline. People got so greedy trying to kill these incredible, beautiful animals so they can make money, and now they can't make any money off them because they killed them all. Nailed it. Great plan. You nailed it. You played yourself. You really did. This species first originated around 7 to 8 million years ago, and for most of the 1900s, it was the highest population of rhino species, believe it or not. That all changed, of course, in the 70s, because of course, that's when the population of black rhinos in general started to decrease. But besides poachers, another cause for the decline was farmers who killed these animals in order to protect their crops that were placed close to rhino territories. The last sighting of a western black rhinoceros was in 2006 in Cameroon's northern province, and sadly the subspecies was officially declared extinct in 2011. Number 4, the splendid poison frog. Perfectly splendid. The splendid poison frog is a species of poison dart frog that was once abundant and thriving and could often be found in western Panama. Researchers believe that a chytrid fungus outbreak in their habitat led to a rapid decline of the species. In fact, this fungus is responsible for the death of a mass amount of amphibian species, as the number of amphibians has been dropping at an alarming rate in the last few decades. We can also do a list on that. Depressing. Because of this, they were basically a species of frog that was once an extremely popular pet. It is thought that there might be unknown specimens which are still alive in captivity, but unfortunately none have been found in the wild, and there aren't any currently that exist in zoos or research collections. The last time one of these frogs was recorded was in 1992. Their fungus outbreak occurred in 1996, and as of 2020, they have been listed as an extinct species. Number 3, the Morian viviparous tree snail. The Morian viviparous sounds like a Harry Potter spell. This snail was a species of air-breathing tropical land snails that were endemic to French Polynesia. The African land snail was introduced into Tahiti in 1967 as a food source, but it quickly escaped and began to destroy crops. Biologists then attempted to control the African land snail population, so they decided to introduce the rosy wolf snail to the area in 1977. Well, this went to believe it or not, although they're snails, it gets pretty aggressive. These snails have beef. The rosy wolf snail didn't just control the population of African land snails, but rather they started to eradicate all of the snails that were native to the area, which of course includes our little Morian viviparous man. So this next little introduction led them to becoming totally extinct in the wild. Keyword here, wild. These snails still exist in captivity, and there have been attempts to re-release them into the wild, but the rosy wolf snail is just sitting out there waiting for them, so they can't release them. They figure it's just gonna be a dead end. Imagine that, just 9 snails waiting outside of a lab, like. So at this point, it looks like they will never be able to return to the wild, which is super sad. It also sucks that the intention really was to help these things, but it just didn't work. At least we tried this time.
Oh yeah, one more.
Number 2, Bramble Cay malamis. These little rodents were a species that was endemic to the isolated Bramble Cay, which is a vegetated coral cay located at the northern tip of the Great Barrier Reef in Australia. The last sighting of these cute little dudes was in 2009, and in May of 2015 they were declared extinct by the IUCN and then by the Australian government later in 2019. So it's official in many ways. The Queensland state government has cited this as the first mammal extinction due to climate change. That's because their extinction was driven by the cay's disappearing vegetation, which was due to rising sea levels. And to even further this, scientists also indicated that storm surges did not help, as it would have inevitably led some of these animals into the species, death. They would drown. One interesting thing about this species, though, the scientists figured out, not really sure how it got to the cay in the first place, but it's believed that perhaps they may have floated over on driftwood, which sounds so cute and funny. That's like a Disney Pixar adventure in the making right there. Imagine these dudes just floating by you. My heart. And finally, number 1, the Spix Macaw. If you've recently watched the 2011 hit animated film Rio, this one should ring a bell. These guys once painted the skies in Brazil. They're absolutely beautiful.
Would you marry me?
Get any Google Pixel 8 phone starting at $10 a month at AT&T. No trade-in required.
medium-sized parrot weighing around 11 ounces, but unfortunately 2016 was the last time they were found in the wild. Illegal pet trade is believed to have played a significant role in the decline of their numbers. Deforestation and their need for a specialized habitat also didn't make it easy for them. While there are currently around 100 of these macaws still left in captivity, there are none in the wild, which is the biggest problem here. Scientists and animal specialists continue to do their best to keep the species alive through the process of captive breeding, and their hope is to one day be able to reintroduce them to the wild, effectively reversing their extinction in the world. It doesn't happen very often that we get a chance to reverse an animal extinction, so I figured we'd end this list off with a little bit of hope.
In spot we have Australopithecus anamensis. Back in 1965, a research team led by Brian Patterson found a single arm bone of an early human at a site which was located in northern Kenya. This was an amazing find, but without additional human fossils, they were unable to identify exactly which species it belonged to. Skip to 1994 and another research team at the same site were able to find numerous teeth and bone fragments, and through these additional samples they were able to determine that these were fossils of a very primitive hominin, and they were able to name a new species. This species had a combination of traits that can be found in both apes as well as humans. The upper end of the tibia or the shin bone shows us signs that it is likely that this species was able to walk on 2 feet. Because of the long forearms and certain features that were found in the wrist bones, it is also suggested that this species likely climbed trees as well. Based on their jaws and teeth, we think that they were likely plant eaters in general, and that their diet mostly consisted of fruits and nuts. In our number 9 spot today, we have Australopithecus afarensis. I actually had never learned of this species before researching for this video, but it turns out that this is one of the longest lived and best known early human species, as researchers have been able to uncover the remains of more than 300 individuals. It is said that this species was first seen somewhere between 3.85 and 2.95 million years ago, and that they survived for an impressive 900,000 years, which is 4 times longer than we as Homo sapiens have been around. More similar to chimpanzees than modern humans, the children of this species grew quite rapidly after birth, and they reached adulthood faster than we do, which means that they likely had less time for parental guidance and socialization. This species had both human and ape-like characteristics. They had more ape-like face proportions and a brain case for a brain 1/3 the size of a modern human brain. They had long, strong arms and curved fingers, which showed that they must have climbed trees. This ability to live both on the ground and in trees is likely what helped them to survive for almost 1 million years through climate and environmental changes. In our number 8 spot today, we have Kenyanthropus platyops. Sorry, I don't speak Latin. This is one of the more mysterious early human species, as there is still so much we don't know about them. What we do know is that they lived in Kenya about 3.5 million years ago, and that they lived at the same time as Australopithecus afarensis we just talked about. Despite them living at the same time, however, this species had smaller molars, which researchers believe reflects a different diet. This means that these two species likely did not have to compete for food. There are some people who believe that us as Homo sapiens are related to this species because of their facial features that are more similar to modern humans compared to the faces of other human species that existed at the time. Not everyone in the scientific community is convinced yet, but hopefully once more specimens and fossils are found, we will be able to get a solid answer. This species remains the only one in their genus, with their name translating to flat-faced from Kenya. In our number 7 spot today, we have Australopithecus africanus. This is a species of early human that does have similarity to others on this list, with a mix of human and ape-like features. Compared to some of the others, however, this species had a rounder cranium that held a larger brain, and they also had smaller teeth. The remains found of this species signify that they did walk on 2 legs, but their arms and hands show that they were also still climbing at this time in the evolution of humans. This species had males that grew to be about 4 feet and 6 inches, while the females grew to be about 3 feet 9 inches. For a while, it was believed that this might be one of the first human species that hunted animals, because of the fact that many of the remains were found among broken animal bones, teeth, and horns. But it was later realized that both these animals in this early human species were just victims of the same predators: lions, leopards, and hyenas. It is now believed that the diet of this species was similar to that of chimpanzees, with fruits, plants, nuts, nuts and seeds, roots, insects, and eggs being their main source of food. In our number 6 spot today, we have Paranthropus aethiopicus. In 1967, the existence of this species was first proposed by a team of French paleontologists who had discovered a toothless mandible that was thought to differ from the other early human species that were known at the time. Many people kind of brushed it off to the side because of the fact that it seemed a little too early to name an entirely different species based on one incomplete mandible. Flash forward to 1985, however, and we have the discovery of what is known as the black skull. Found just west of Lake Turkana in Kenya, this skull confirmed what those who discovered that jawbone had thought. This skull had a dark color to it from the minerals in the soil that were absorbed by the skull as it fossilized, and it was able to show a species that had a mix of both derived and primitive traits. This is when we confirmed the past existence of this new species, dating back to at least 2.5 million years ago in Eastern Africa. In our number 5 spot today, we have Australopithecus gari. With a name that translates to surprise, this species definitely wasn't one that researchers expected to find. This is quite a mysterious species, with much of what they and their lives were like remaining hidden in the past, but what we do know is that this might have been one of the first human species to use stone tools. And it doesn't stop there. While fossils of this species are associated with or were found with some of the earliest known stone tools, they were also found along with animal bones that were cut and broken open with the tools. This may mean that this species was also among the first to have a diet that included meat and bone marrow from large animals. That is a huge moment in terms of human history. I mean, it likely changed the development of humans as a whole. This species is believed to have lived about 2.5 million years ago, and some experts believe that they may be an ancestor of ours. In our number 4 spot today, we have Paranthropus boisei. This is a species that is said to have lived somewhere around 2.3 to 1.2 million years ago. Like others in this genus, they are said to be characterized by a special skull that was adapted for more heavy chewing. This adaptation is seen in the appearance of this species, as they had much wider faces and molars and premolars that are about 4 times the size of modern humans. They also had the thickest dental enamel of any known early human, which I guess is a fun fact you can use the next time somebody asks you. Because of their appearance and these features, researchers speculate that this species had a bit of a rough diet. Experts believe that while when they could, they likely ate many fruits and plants, when they had to, they also had the ability to resort to tough roots and nuts. While this species lived for quite some time on this planet and coexisted with other early human species, most experts agree that they are not in the ancestral line that led to us modern humans. In our number 3 spot today, we have Australopithecus sediba. This species is an important one when it comes to us because some suggest that looking at the remains and fossils we have of them may just give us valuable insight into the origins and the ancestor of the genus Homo, which is what we are. We don't really know our family tree, so to speak, all the way from the first early human species, so this might just give us some clues that can help figure it out. Said to have lived between 1.97 and 1.98 million years ago, this species has traits that are similar to some of the other earlier human species we talked about, but also some traits that are more similar to us. Remains of this species show us that it is likely that walking on 2 feet was probably their most usual form of movement. This was mostly seen in changes to the pelvis, which shows us that this is one of the first things that really changed when it came to early humans evolving these more modern traits. What is peculiar, however, is that there is also evidence that this species walked in a completely different way than any other species before it. It is said that they walked on 2 feet, but each step they had their foot turned inward with a weight focused on the outer edge of their foot. This shows us that it might be likely that the way we walk evolved through a bunch of different paths, which is kind of cool. In our number 2 spot today, we have Paranthropus robustus. Back in 1938, scientist Robert Broom bought a fossil jaw fragment and molar that was said to belong to a previously known early human species. When he examined these specimens, however, he felt as though they were different from any of the other he had seen in his career. This led to him taking a trip to South Africa to explore the site they were said to have come from. Here, he collected many more bones and teeth, and he was able to discover this previously unknown species with a name that translates to beside man. Said to have lived 1.8 to 1.2 million years ago, this species still remains much of a mystery. Scientists still aren't exactly sure which other human species this one evolved from, but what we do know about them is one of their practices that they had with the use of bone tools. With these tools, there has been evidence found that this species liked to dig into termite mounds. Researchers are trying to find out if this practice was more regional or if it was shared across the entire species. In our number 1 spot today, we have Homo heidelbergensis. In 1908 in Germany, a workman discovered a jawbone that was nearly complete with the exception of the missing premolars and the first 2 left molars. With more examination, it was realized that this was the discovery of an entirely new species. This early human species had a very large brow ridge and a large brain case. They also had a flatter face than other early human species, but perhaps the most interesting thing about them is that they are the first known human species to live in a colder climate. This species is said to have had short, wide bodies that were likely an evolutionary adaptation to conserve heat. Dated back to about 700,000 to 200,000 years ago, this species lived at the time that we know as the earliest example of when human species were able to control fire, as well as the earliest known use of wooden spears. This is also said to have been the first known human species to routinely hunt large animals. Another remarkable feat of this species is that they were the first to build shelters, as they created little dwellings made from wood and rock. It is unclear exactly how they used these dwellings, but they changed the course of history with this new ground. Starting off this list, in our number 10 spot, we have Sahelanthropus chadensis. This species is one of the oldest known in the human family tree. We are starting right at the beginning. This species is said to have lived about 6 to 7 million years ago in West Central Africa. It is thought that they had the ability to walk upright, and this may have helped them diversify the habitats that they could live in. Although we only have cranial remains of this species, studies have shown that they likely had a mix of ape-like and human-like features. The ape-like features include a small brain, a sloping face, really prominent brow ridges, and an elongated skull. In terms of human-like features, it is said that they had smaller canine teeth, a shorter middle part of their face, and a spinal cord opening underneath the skull, which likely helped them to walk on 2 feet. It wasn't until 2001 when the remains of this species were discovered, making it quite a recent discovery. With this discovery came the knowledge that early humans were a bit more widespread at the time than we had originally believed. In our number 9 spot today, we have Ororantegenesis. Also referred to as the Millennium Man, this species is another one of the earliest on the human family tree, and they are said to have lived about
Care. It's been the heart of our mission for more than 25 years. If you need health insurance or if your coverage is changing, Fidelis Care can help. Call 1-888-FIDELIS, TTY 711, or visit fideliscare.org.
about 6 million years ago. This species was discovered in 2001 by a team of French paleontologists who were searching in the Tunjan Hills region of central Kenya. Here they found over a dozen fossils that belonged to the early humans of this time period. The people of this species are said to have been about the size of a chimpanzee, and they had small teeth with thick enamel, not unlike us modern humans. While any discovery of early human remains is fascinating and super important, it is said that the most important fossil from this species is that of an upper femur, which shows evidence that this is a species that was bipedal. They likely still climbed trees and that sort of a thing, but they also likely walked upright. In our number 8 spot today, we have Ardipithecus cadaba. This is a species that had its discovery in 1997, but when the paleontologist who first found a piece of lower jaw lying on the ground, he didn't think that he had just discovered a new species. After 10 more specimens were found, however, it was safe to say that a new early human ancestor had been identified. The remains, which included this jaw as well as hand and foot bones, partial arm bones, and a collarbone, were dated back to about 5.6 to 5.8 million years ago. The toe bones showed us that this species walked on 2 feet, and the fossils of other animals found in the area where these early human remains were found showed that they lived in a mix of woodlands and grasslands. Because we have jaw remains, we have been able to conclude that they likely ate a variety of fibrous foods. Their back teeth were larger than a chimpanzee's, but their front teeth were more narrow. In our number 7 spot today, we have Ardipithecus ramidus. This is a species that was first reported in 1994, but in 2009, scientists announced that there had been a partial skeleton found. The remains were given the nickname Ardi, and they showed some interesting evidence when it came to trying to determine how this species walked. The foot bones in the skeleton are said to, quote, indicate a divergent large toe combined with a rigid foot. Apparently, this means that we are kind of unsure exactly how they might have walked, but with a pelvis reconstructed from crushed remains that were found, experts found adaptations that would allow both tree climbing as well as bipedal activities. Artie's remains were discovered alongside other animal remains that showed she lived in a more wooded environment, which showed us that early human species started walking on 2 feet for reasons other than because they lived in open grassy areas. In our number 6 spot today, we have Homo gottengensis. This is an early human species that is said to have quite large teeth, which help them chew up their heavy plant diet. This species is said to have still had quite small brains, but that they also likely produced stone tools, and that they may have even made fires, as there is evidence of burnt animal bones alongside their remains that have been found. This species wasn't the tallest of the early humans, standing at about 3 feet tall. This species walked upright on 2 feet, but experts have said that they likely spent a significant amount of time in the trees. Researchers believe that this species lacked speech and language skills, and because of their anatomy and their geological age, at this point in time, experts think that while we, as modern humans, are a close relative of this species, we are not a direct ancestor. In our number 5 spot today, we have Homo ergaster. This is a species that has caused quite a controversy in the scientific world. Some experts out there believe that this species should be combined into the species of H. erectus that we spoke about on part 1 of this series, but not everyone is on board with this idea. This is still a dispute that is ongoing with those who are responsible for classifying these sorts of things, but as of right now, they are still their own classification with a name that roughly translates to working man. This name comes from the more advanced tools this species used in comparison to some of the older ancestors. Fossils found from this species are said to date back somewhere between 1.7 to 1.4 million years ago, but it is noted that they may have lived for a longer time than this. Some of the features that separate this species from others of their time are their longer legs, their larger body